What if everything you thought you knew about the Middle Ages was only half the story? We often picture this era as a time of chivalrous knights, towering castles, and perhaps the occasional dragon, but hidden beneath these familiar images lies a world brimming with secrets so profound, so mystifying, that even today they challenge our understanding of history itself. This was an age of whispered legends and unexplained phenomena, where the line between myth and reality blurred into shadows. And it's within those shadows that some of history's most tantalizing puzzles were born. Riddles carved into stone, vanishing villages, celestial events with no explanation, and artifacts that seemed to defy the very timeline we thought we knew. Think about it, for centuries these mysteries have lingered just out of reach, tucked away in crumbling manuscripts, half-remembered folktales, and the silent ruins of forgotten places. They speak of a time when the world felt both immense and intimate, where every forest could hide a secret and every monastery guard a forbidden truth. These aren't just curiosities, they're portals that invite us to step beyond the textbook narrative and into a deeper, far more intriguing version of the past. One where questions outnumber answers, and where the hunger to understand connects us directly to the people who lived these mysteries centuries ago. That's exactly the journey we're embarking on today. Together, we'll venture into the heart of 30 forgotten enigmas from the medieval world, stories that have, against all odds, slipped through the cracks of common history. Each one is a piece of a grander puzzle, a glimpse into the ambitions, fears, and wonders of an era that was far more complex and curious than we often give it credit for. So settle in, let's peel back the layers of time, challenge what we think we know, and rediscover the profound and often breathtaking mysteries that still echo from the medieval world. Our first journey into the unknown takes us to the silent, climate-controlled vault of Yale University's Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library. Here, resting under glass, is an object that has baffled cryptographers, historians, and even military codebreakers for over a century. It's a book that looks medieval, feels medieval, but communicates in a language that simply doesn't exist. This is the Voynich Manuscript, and it is arguably the most stubborn linguistic puzzle ever created by human hands. Imagine holding a 240-page volume, its vellum pages softly whispering with age. The text is flowing and elegant, written left to right in an unknown script with seeming confidence, as if its author knew exactly what they were writing. But surrounding this unreadable text are illustrations that plunge from the confusing into the outright surreal. There are detailed botanical drawings of plants that have never grown on this earth flora, with swirling roots and impossible blossoms that no botanist has ever been able to identify. The book then shifts to astrological charts filled with unfamiliar constellations and nude figures bathing in what appear to be interconnected, intricate plumbing systems. Then come the biological sections, depicting cellular-like structures and tiny, naked women inhabiting what looks like a microscopic universe. The theories surrounding its origin are as numerous as they are fascinating. Carbon dating places the vellum somewhere between 1404 and 1438, squarely in the early 15th century, but who created it? Some propose it was the work of a brilliant, perhaps unhinged, natural philosopher attempting to document a world only they could see. Others suggest it's an elaborate hoax, a meaningless fabrication designed to fool a wealthy patron. Yet the text itself possesses a statistical structure eerily similar to a real language, with word patterns and repetitions that feel too ordered, too deliberate to be pure nonsense. This complexity has attracted some of the greatest minds in code-breaking, from World War II cryptographers who cracked enemy ciphers to modern artificial intelligence algorithms, all of which have tried and ultimately failed to find a coherent key. This book is more than just an unsolved code. It's a ghost from the past, a tangible object that refuses to give up its secrets. Was it a treatise on forgotten alchemical knowledge? a secret language invented for a lost spiritual practice? Or does it represent something else entirely, a glimpse into a unique mind whose way of seeing the world was so different, so singular, that it became entirely untranslatable to the rest of us? The Voynich Manuscript stands as a silent testament to the limits of our understanding, a beautiful and maddening reminder that some secrets are destined to remain in the shadows. But if the Voynich Manuscript represents a mystery of human creation, our next enigma forces us to confront something far stranger emerging directly from the English countryside. Journey with me now to the village of Woolpit in Suffolk during the reign of King Stephen in the 12th century. It was during the harvest season, as the story goes, that reapers working the fields made a discovery so bizarre it would be recorded in 2 separate chronicles of the time. They found 2 children, a boy and a girl, huddled together and terrified at the edge of a wolf pit, a trap dug for predators. Their clothing was made from a strange, unfamiliar material, but the most shocking detail was their skin. It was a vivid, startling shade of green. The children spoke a language no one could recognize or even place, and they were initially too frightened to eat any of the food offered to them. Eventually, they were brought to the home of a local knight, where they slowly began to acclimate. They eventually developed a taste for beans, the only sustenance they would accept at first, and as their diet changed, their green pigmentation gradually faded. After learning some English, the boy and girl were able to tell a fragment of their story. They claimed to come from a place called St. Martin's Land, a twilight world where the sun never rose and the light was perpetual, like a dim, overcast day. They said they were tending their father's flock when they heard a loud noise like bells and suddenly found themselves transported to the Woolpit field, disoriented and lost. Tragically, the boy grew sickly and passed away not long after, but the girl survived, was baptized and lived on, eventually losing her green hue completely and working as a servant in the area. This account, documented by the chroniclers William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, has spawned centuries of speculation. One of the most persistent modern theories points to a condition known as chloroses, or green sickness, a form of anemia often linked to malnutrition. This could explain the pallor, especially if the children were Flemish immigrants fleeing persecution, hiding in wooded areas and suffering from a severely deficient diet heavy on things like sorrel or other green plants, potentially compounded by arsenic poisoning from copper mining, which can also tint the skin a greenish hue. Their unfamiliar language could have been a Flemish dialect utterly foreign to the rural Suffolk ear. Yet for many, the earthly explanations don't fully satisfy. The children's own description of their origin, a land of perpetual twilight, has fueled more fantastical ideas. Could they have been subterranean beings emerging from a hidden world beneath our feet? Or, in a more modern twist, does their story read like a primitive account of an extraterrestrial encounter? The loud bells resembling some form of spacecraft, the disorientation, the strange pigmentation that faded on an earthly diet, it all creates a compelling, if outlandish, narrative. The Green Children of Woolpit remain an enduring folk mystery, a brief, colorful crack in the ordinary world through which we can peer into the medieval mind and its capacity for wonder, forcing us to ask if we are hearing a distorted account of a historical event or a beautiful, symbolic folktale that has somehow fossilized into history. And while the Green Children offer a glimpse into a world of folklore and potential misunderstanding, our next mystery centers on a loss so profound it has haunted historians for centuries. We travel now to 16th century Russia, to the court of one of history's most formidable and fearsome rulers, Ivan the Terrible. Beyond his infamous legacy of paranoia and brutality, Ivan was also a man of surprising intellect and a voracious collector. His most coveted possession, according to persistent legend, was a library of unimaginable value, not of gold or jewels but of knowledge. This was the legendary Lost Library of the Tsars, a collection so vast and ancient that its discovery would fundamentally rewrite our understanding of the classical world. The story of this library begins not in Moscow, but in the heart of the fallen Byzantine Empire. In 1453, as the Ottoman Turks besieged Constantinople, the last emperor Constantine Palaeologus knew the end was near. To preserve the greatest treasures of his civilization, he allegedly arranged for his niece, Sophia Palaeologa, to flee the city. Her dowry was not merely gold and silver, but something far more precious, the entire imperial library of Constantinople. This was no ordinary collection. It was believed to contain the surviving masterpieces of ancient Greek and Roman literature, scrolls and codices that had been lost to Western Europe for 1,000 years. Think of the complete works of historians like Livy, the lost plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles, philosophical texts by Aristotle that we never knew existed, and scientific treatises that could contain forgotten wisdom. This was the dying breath of the Roman Empire, entrusted to a princess for safekeeping. Sophia eventually married Ivan III of Russia, Ivan the Terrible's grandfather, and brought this monumental collection to Moscow. It was Ivan the Terrible, a highly educated man who was fluent in several languages and deeply interested in the occult and ancient knowledge, who became the library's most obsessive guardian. He reportedly stored the collection in a secret, fortified basement vault beneath the Kremlin, or perhaps within the labyrinthine tunnels of his personal stronghold, the Alexandrovskaya Sloboda. He consulted these texts, but following his death in 1584, the library vanished from all historical record. It simply disappeared. The hunt for this bibliographic Holy Grail has consumed treasure hunters and scholars ever since. The most popular theory places it deep within the underground passages beneath the Moscow Kremlin, perhaps hidden behind a false wall or in a chamber sealed by Ivan himself. Others believe it could be in the town of Vologda, a place Ivan used as a personal refuge during the most dangerous times of his rule. Some even speculate it was lost to a fire, though no evidence has ever confirmed its destruction. The historical value of this collection is almost impossible to overstate. The texts within the Library of Alexandria were largely lost to fire and decay. The Library of Constantinople was the last great repository of classical knowledge. Finding it would be like recovering an entire missing chapter of human thought. We could finally read the complete histories that shaped our world, understand the full scope of Greek drama, and uncover scientific and philosophical ideas that could challenge our modern assumptions. It is a treasure hunt for the very foundation of Western civilization, a silent echo of ancient genius waiting beneath the modern streets of Moscow, daring someone to listen. Leaving behind the silent, dusty hunt for a lost library, we now arrive at a mystery that is all too visceral, a phenomenon of pure, unrestrained movement that seized an entire city. The year was 1518. The place was Strasbourg, a bustling free city within the Holy Roman Empire, and the event was one of the most bewildering and terrifying public spectacles ever recorded. This was the Dancing Plague, a real-life episode that seems to defy all logic and medicine even today. Imagine the scene in the heat of that July. It began as these things often do with a single person. A woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began to dance. Not a dance of joy or celebration, but a compulsive, frantic, and utterly uncontrolled jig. She danced for hours alone, her face a mask of anguish and exhaustion. When she finally collapsed, it was only for a brief respite before her body forced her back up, continuing its terrible, involuntary performance. Within a week, her solitary agony had become a shared nightmare. Dozens of others had joined her, their bodies similarly gripped by this relentless urge to move. The city council, initially believing this to be a public disturbance that could be danced out of their systems, made a catastrophic decision. They hired musicians and even built a stage in the Guildhall Square, thinking that providing structure and music would help the afflicted dancers work through their fit. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The music seemed to act as a trigger, and the number of dancers swelled into the hundreds. For weeks, the desperate spectacle continued. Men, women, and children twitched, jerked, and convulsed in the summer heat. Their feet bled, their hearts gave out, and some danced themselves to literal death from strokes, heart attacks, or sheer physical exhaustion. Chroniclers of the time describe a scene from a waking nightmare, a city held hostage by a rhythm of its own suffering, the air filled with the sound of gasping breaths and the shuffling of bloody feet on cobblestones. So what could possibly cause such a terrifying event? Modern science offers several compelling theories, each a window into the complex interplay between mind, body, and society. The first and perhaps most popular explanation for decades was ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, a staple grain of the medieval diet. It contains chemicals closely related to LSD, which can cause powerful hallucinations, convulsions, and a burning sensation in the limbs known in the Middle Ages as St. Anthony's fire. It's a plausible culprit, as it could have contaminated the bread supply, inducing mass hallucinations that made people believe they were dancing. However, this theory has a significant flaw. While ergotism can cause spasms and convulsions, it typically leads to gangrene and loss of limbs, not the sustained, coordinated, days-long exertion seen in Strasbourg. It also doesn't explain why the dancing was so strangely contagious, spreading from person to person. This leads us to the second, and for many historians, the more convincing explanation: mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. This is a phenomenon where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms in a group of people. To understand this, we must look at the social context of Strasbourg in 1518. The city was under immense strain. It had been hit by a series of devastating famines, the political situation was unstable, and a wave of new diseases like syphilis had created a pervasive climate of fear and superstition. The people were deeply religious and believed strongly in the power of saints and curses. In such a pressure cooker of anxiety, a shared psychological break becomes far more understandable. The dancing could have started as one individual's extreme stress response, and through the power of suggestion and shared fear, it spread like a psychic virus, a physical expression of a community's collective despair. The dancers weren't faking, their bodies were genuinely, physically reacting to an overwhelming psychological trauma they could not otherwise process. Perhaps the most haunting theory combines both of these ideas. It suggests that a minor physical trigger, like a small, localized case of food poisoning or a seizure disorder in one person, acted as a spark that landed on the perfect tinder of a terrified, superstitious, and stressed population. The community's existing belief in vengeful saints, specifically Saint Vitus, who was associated with dancing mania, provided a ready-made narrative. People believed they were cursed by the saint, and that belief alone could have powered the physical response, creating a feedback loop of fear and movement. The dancing plague of Strasbourg is more than a medical oddity. It is a stark lesson in the incredible power of the human mind over the body, and a terrifying example of how societal fear can manifest in the most physical and public way imaginable, a desperate, bleeding dance against the darkness of a frightened age. From the haunting spectacle of a city dancing itself to ruin, we travel now to an even darker and more intimate tragedy, one that unfolded not in the public square but within the cold stone walls of a royal fortress. This is a story of power, ambition, and the silent, chilling disappearance of two children who stood in the way of a crown. In the tumultuous year of 1483, the very heart of the English monarchy was torn apart by a mystery that has obsessed historians, inspired Shakespeare, and fueled debate for over 5 centuries: the fate of the princes in the Tower. The stage was set by the sudden death of the charismatic King Edward IV in April of that year. His heir and successor was his 12-year-old son, who immediately became King Edward V. As was customary, the young king and his 9-year-old brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, were placed in the Tower of London. It's crucial to understand that at this time the Tower was not solely a prison. It was a royal residence and a place of safekeeping before a coronation. They were under the protection of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who had been appointed Lord Protector to rule on the boy king's behalf until he came of age. But the wheels of ambition were already turning. The Duke of Gloucester moved swiftly against the boy's maternal relatives, the Woodville family, whom he accused of plotting against him. He had the boy's uncle and half-brother arrested and executed without trial. Then, in a stunning political coup, he declared the marriage of Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville invalid, rendering all their children illegitimate and therefore ineligible for the throne. With the path cleared, the Duke of Gloucester crowned himself King Richard III in a lavish ceremony, and after that day, the two princes were never seen in public again. The traditional narrative, immortalized by William Shakespeare and the Tudor historians who followed him, paints Richard III as the quintessential villain, a scheming hunchback who coldly ordered the murder of his own nephews to secure his stolen throne. This version of events seems to fit the evidence of his ruthless actions leading up to their disappearance. He had the motive, the opportunity, and a proven capacity for brutality. If we accept this theory, the order was likely carried out by Sir James Tyrrell, one of Richard's loyal knights, who much later, under torture during the reign of Henry VII, allegedly confessed to having the boys smothered in their sleep and buried at the foot of a staircase within the tower. However, the case is far from closed. Other compelling theories point the finger in different directions. Another powerful figure with much to gain from the princes' deaths was Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham. Initially Richard's key ally, Buckingham later turned against him and led a rebellion. Some speculate he may have orchestrated the murders on his own initiative to destabilize Richard's reign, perhaps hoping to seize the crown for himself. Then there is the most successful beneficiary of the entire affair, Henry Tudor, who defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field to become King Henry VII. By marrying the prince's eldest sister, Elizabeth of York, Henry united the warring houses of Lancaster and York and founded the powerful Tudor dynasty. He had a powerful motive to eliminate any potential rivals with a stronger claim to the throne than his own. If the princes were still alive when he took power, their existence would have been a constant threat to his legitimacy. It is certainly plausible that Henry or his supporters quietly disposed of them after Bosworth. The mystery deepened dramatically in the 17th century. Workers renovating the tower in 1674 discovered a wooden chest buried beneath a staircase leading to the chapel of the White Tower. Inside were the small skeletons of two children. King Charles II, believing these to be the remains of the princes, had them interred in a marble urn in Westminster Abbey. A forensic examination in 1933 confirmed the bones were of two children roughly the right ages, though the technology of the time could not provide a precise date of death or cause. The remains have not been subjected to modern DNA analysis, leaving this piece of evidence frustratingly incomplete. The disappearance of the princes created a vacuum of certainty that allowed the victors, the Tudors, to craft a narrative of a monstrous uncle that served their political purposes for generations. It solidified Richard's reputation as one of history's great villains and provided the perfect moral justification for Henry VII's reign. This single event, shrouded in silence, irrevocably altered the course of English history, ending the Plantagenet line and ushering in the age of the Tudors. It remains the ultimate cold case, a poignant reminder of the human cost of power and the enduring allure of a mystery where the truth remains quite literally buried. While the fate of the princes presents a mystery of human greed and political betrayal, our next enigma shifts the focus from a missing person to a missing object, one that represents not earthly power but divine grace. Few relics have captured the human imagination quite like the Holy Grail. More than a simple cup, it became the ultimate symbol of spiritual quest, a vessel of infinite power and purity that has been sought for over a millennium. But where did this legend begin, and why did it resonate so powerfully in the medieval mind? The Grail's origins are surprisingly murky. It first bursts into literature not in a dusty religious text, but in a vibrant, sprawling work of fiction around the end of the 12th century. The French poet Chrétien de Troyes penned Percival, the story of the Grail, introducing it as a dazzling platter or wide dish carried in a mysterious procession, possessing the magical ability to provide food and sustenance. There was no mention of Christ or the Last Supper. It was an object of wonder in a world of Arthurian knights and enchantment. The connection to Christianity was forged soon after by other writers, most notably Robert de Boron. In his verse romance, Joseph d'Arimathie, he brilliantly fused the Celtic myth with Christian theology. He identified the Grail as the very cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper, which was then used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch the blood and water that flowed from Christ's side as he hung on the cross. This transformation elevated the Grail from a magical artifact to the most sacred relic in existence, a physical container for the divine essence of Christ himself. This new, potent symbolism made the Grail the centerpiece of the entire Arthurian cycle. It became the ultimate object of knightly quest, a test of purity and faith that was far more demanding than any battle. A knight like Percival or Galahad couldn't find the Grail through strength alone. It required perfect spiritual virtue, a heart free from sin and entirely dedicated to God. This idea was incredibly appealing in the High Middle Ages, a time of intense Christian fervor, crusades, and the growing culture of chivalry. The Grail quest represented the highest possible calling for a knight, merging the martial code of honor with a deep, personal piety. It was a story that told them their strength and courage could be directed toward a heavenly goal, making their worldly struggles part of a grand, divine plan. But if the Grail was a literary sensation, did anyone in the Middle Ages believe it was a real, physical object waiting to be found? Absolutely. And this belief sparked numerous claims and legends about its whereabouts. One of the oldest and most enduring traditions points to Glastonbury in England. The story goes that Joseph of Arimathea, after the crucifixion, journeyed to Britain as a missionary. He supposedly arrived at Glastonbury Tor, thrust his staff into the ground where it miraculously flowered into the holy thorn tree, and founded the first Christian church in Britain. Hidden somewhere near this sacred site, perhaps even beneath the ancient Glastonbury Abbey, was the Holy Grail. This legend was powerfully boosted in the medieval period when monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have discovered the graves of the legendary King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, firmly tying the location to the greatest Arthurian myths. For many, this made Glastonbury the logical resting place of the Grail, a secret buried in the very heart of the English countryside. Yet another, even more audacious claim comes from the Cathedral of Valencia in Spain. Here, displayed in a special chapel, is the Santo Cáliz, a simple cup made of dark red agate stone, mounted with a medieval gold and gemstone base and stem. Its documented history is remarkably detailed. It is said to have been taken by Saint Peter to Rome after the crucifixion, where it was used by the early popes. Facing persecution, it was then sent to Huesca in Spain for safekeeping, and after the Muslim invasion of the Iberian Peninsula, it was hidden away in the Pyrenees Mountains. It eventually found its way to the royal palace of Valencia in the 15th century before being entrusted to the cathedral. Scientific analysis dates the agate bowl itself to the period between the 2nd century BC and the 1st century AD, and it is of a style that could have been used in the Palestine of Jesus' time. The Vatican has even granted indulgences to pilgrims who visit it, and Pope John Paul Roman II and Pope Benedict XVI both used the Santo Cáliz during Mass, lending it a significant degree of official, though not definitive, recognition. So why does the quest for the Grail continue to fascinate us long after the Age of Knights has passed? Because it is the ultimate metaphor. On one level, it represents an unattainable ideal, a perfection that we are always striving for but can never quite reach. It is the elusive answer to our deepest questions, the cure for our existential ailments, the source of meaning we are always searching for. The Grail legend tells us that the journey itself, with all its trials and tribulations, is what purifies and defines us, not merely the destination. The object may be physical, but its true power is transformative. It asks not, "Where is the cup?" but "Who among us is pure enough of heart to deserve it?" This timeless question, first posed in the great halls and courts of the medieval world, continues to echo, inviting every generation to embark on its own quest for something greater. Moving from the hallowed quest for the Holy Grail, we venture now into a tale of faith, fire, and a treasure that vanished into the very mountains that sheltered it. This is the story of the Cathars, a community who dared to defy the most powerful institution in the medieval world, and the legendary treasure they died to protect. Our setting shifts to the sun-baked hills of Languedoc in southern France, and our countdown reaches the year 1244 at the stark fortress of Montségur, the final refuge of a faith under siege. The Cathars, also known as the Albigensians, were not merely heretics in the eyes of the Church. They represented an entirely different form of Christianity. They were dualists believing in a world created by two gods, a good God who ruled the realm of the spirit and an evil God, often associated with the Old Testament's Jehovah, who had created the corrupt material world. To them, the human body was a prison for the divine soul, and their ultimate goal was to escape the cycle of reincarnation through a strict ascetic life and a rite of spiritual baptism known as the consolamentum. This radical rejection of the material world and the Catholic Church's hierarchy, sacraments, and wealth made them a direct threat to papal authority. For decades, the Church attempted to convert them through preaching, but when that failed, it unleashed a crusade, the Albigensian Crusade, a brutal war of extermination that turned the south of France into a bloody battleground for over 40 years. By 1243, the last major bastion of Cathar resistance was the mountaintop castle of Montségur, a true eagle's nest perched on a rocky pog. It sheltered about 400 people, a mix of perfecti, the spiritually pure Cathar elders, and their supporters, the credents. For 10 months, the fortress endured a grueling siege by thousands of Crusader troops. The defenders held out with astonishing resilience, but by March of 1244, their situation was hopeless. They negotiated a surrender. The terms were stark: renounce your faith or be burned alive. On March 16th, over 200 perfecti and credents who refused to recant were led down the mountain to a field below. There, they were herded into a large wooden stockade piled high with kindling and set ablaze. They marched into the flames singing, becoming martyrs for a belief the world had tried to erase. But here is where history gives way to mystery. In the 2 weeks between the surrender and the mass burning, under the very noses of the besieging army, something extraordinary happened. Under cover of darkness, 4 perfecti expert climbers are said to have been lowered down the sheer, most undefended cliff face of the mountain. They vanished into the forest, taking with them the legendary treasure of the Cathars. They were never caught, and the treasure was never found. So what was this treasure that was worth such a desperate final mission? The most straightforward theory is that it was the community's material wealth, gold, silver, and jewels donated by their many noble supporters across Languedoc. This fortune would have been meant to ensure the survival of their faith in exile, funding new communities far from the reach of the crusade. Yet many believed the real treasure was something far more profound. The 4 escapees may have been carrying the sacred texts and rituals of the Cathar faith, their own gospels and interpretations, which would have been considered infinitely more valuable than gold by the perfecti. Possessing these would mean their beliefs could live on, even if their people were destroyed. This is where the legend expands into the realm of high adventure, intertwining with the myths we've already explored. Some speculate the treasure was nothing less than the Holy Grail itself. Proponents of this idea suggest the Cathars were the guardians of this ultimate Christian relic, perhaps even that their dualist beliefs were inspired by its mystical power. The GRILS Chinese letter journey from Jerusalem to Europe could have passed through their hands, making Montségur its final hiding place before it was smuggled to safety. An even more tantalizing theory connects the Cathar treasure to the Knights Templar. The Templars had a significant presence in the Languedoc region and were known to be sympathetic to the Cathar cause. It's possible the Four Perfecti delivered their charge, be it gold or a sacred object, into the safekeeping of the Templar Order, who then hid it within their vast network of preceptories and temples. This would forge a direct link between the lost treasure of a destroyed faith and the soon-to-be persecuted Templars, creating a continuum of hidden knowledge and wealth. The legacy of this mystery is etched into the landscape itself. The mountain of Montségur today is a place of pilgrimage and speculation. Each year, on the anniversary of the burnings, the sun rises directly through the arrow slit of the fortress's eastern wall, a celestial alignment that suggests the site held deep spiritual significance beyond its military function. Modern treasure hunters, drawn by these echoes, have scoured the countless caves and forests of the Sabards Mountains, but the rugged terrain has guarded its secret well. The treasure of the Cathars, whether a chest of gold, a library of lost wisdom, or a relic of unimaginable power, remains one of history's most compelling ghosts. It represents the unbreakable will of a people who chose to save their soul over their body, ensuring that their final, defiant act was not one of destruction but of preservation, a final hope hidden in the shadows waiting to be found. From the smoldering ashes of Montségur, our journey now carries us east, across continents and deep into the realm of pure imagination, a realm given startling substance by a single, extraordinary letter. In the middle of the 12th century, at the height of the Crusades, a mysterious missive began to circulate through the courts of Europe. It was addressed to the Byzantine Emperor and the Pope, and it was from a man who called himself Prester John, the priest king. He claimed to rule a vast, fabulously wealthy Christian empire located somewhere beyond the lands of the Muslim Saracens, in the distant, barely known East. For a Europe mired in conflict and desperate for allies, his words were not just a curiosity, they were a divine revelation, a beacon of hope in a seemingly endless holy war. The contents of this letter were nothing short of miraculous. Prester John described his kingdom as a terrestrial paradise, a land flowing with milk and honey and unimaginable riches. He spoke of rivers of gold, a palace made of precious gems, and a fountain that granted eternal youth. His realm was populated by strange and wondrous creatures, giants, headless men with faces on their chests, and tribes who could harness the power of ants to mine their gold. But the most crucial detail, the one that electrified all of Christendom, was that he and all his subjects were devout Christians. He wrote of 72 kings who paid him tribute, and he expressed his fervent desire to journey westward, to reunite with his fellow believers in Europe, crush the Muslim powers between them, and reclaim Jerusalem for Christendom. This was the fantasy every crusading knight and pious ruler had dreamed of, a powerful, righteous ally appearing from the shadows of the map to turn the tide of history. The impact of this legend was immediate and profound. For centuries, it fundamentally shaped European geopolitics and exploration. Pope Alexander III even sent a reply via his physician, a man named Philip, though the messenger and the letter vanished without a trace. The dream of Prester John's kingdom became a potent motivator for explorers and missionaries. It drove the expansion of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century, as travelers like Marco Polo ventured into the vast steppes of Asia partly in the hope of making contact with this powerful Christian monarch. Later, as the age of discovery dawned, the quest simply shifted geography. When European navigators began charting the coast of Africa, the legend of Prester John moved with them, now supposedly ruling a kingdom hidden somewhere in the highlands of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. The Portuguese dispatched expeditions deep into the interior of the continent, driven by the unwavering belief that they would find this legendary king and forge a powerful alliance that would encircle their Muslim rivals. But who or what was the real inspiration behind this enduring myth? Historians have several compelling candidates. The most likely origin points to a stunning military victory that occurred in Central Asia in the year 1141. A nomadic Buddhist people called the Kara Kittans, under their leader Yeludashi, decisively defeated the Seljuk Turkish Sultan Sanjar near the city of Samarkand. News of this defeat of a powerful Muslim ruler by a mysterious army from the east would have traveled slowly and become distorted as it passed through countless languages and cultures. To eager ears in Europe, a distant, victorious non-Muslim ruler could easily have been transformed into the hoped-for Christian savior, Prester John. The title itself may be a corruption of the Asian name Wang Khan or Ung Khan, a title held by a powerful ruler of the Kherate tribe, a Nestorian Christian people who lived in Mongolia. This historical figure, Togrul, was actually an ally of the young Genghis Khan, and was known to the West through embassies and travelers' tales. His identity as a Christian monarch of a vast steppe empire would have perfectly fit the growing legend. Another strong contender is the ancient Christian kingdom of Ethiopia, which had been isolated from the rest of Christendom for centuries following the rise of Islam. Rumors of a powerful Christian kingdom beyond Egypt had persisted in Europe for ages. When diplomatic contact between Ethiopia and Europe increased in the 14th century, it seemed to confirm the long-held belief that Prester John's kingdom was real and had been found at last. The Ethiopian Negus, or emperor, even began using the title in his correspondence with European powers, fully embracing the mythical role that had been prepared for him. The true power of the Prester John story lies not in its historical accuracy, but in what it reveals about the medieval worldview. It was a perfect reflection of their hopes, their fears, and the vast blanks on their maps that they filled with faith and wonder. He was the ultimate what-if, a symbol of the universal longing for a hidden ally, a secret weapon, a promised land just over the horizon. His legend drove exploration, inspired voyages that connected worlds, and demonstrated how a powerful story can sometimes shape reality far more than any fact. He was a king made of parchment and hope, whose empire, though it never existed on any map, forever changed the map of the world. Yet even as the legend of a lost Christian king fired the imagination of Europe, a far colder and more concrete mystery was unfolding on the very edge of the Roman Empire, in the rain-swept hills of northern Britain. Here, the ultimate symbol of Roman order and military might, an entire legion of over 5,000 professional soldiers vanished from the historical record without a single definitive account of its fate. This is the enduring enigma of the Ninth Legion, known as Legio Nona Hispana, and its disappearance has become one of Britain's most captivating historical puzzles. The Ninth Legion had a long and storied history, earning its Hispana title for service in Spain and fighting with distinction under Julius Caesar and later Emperor Augustus. By the early 2nd century, it was a permanent fixture in Britain, stationed at the fortress of Eboracum, what we now know as the city of York. Its primary duty was to help secure the northern frontier of the Roman province of Britannia, a wild and hostile land dominated by the fierce Celtic tribes known as the Picts, a name derived from the Latin for painted people. The historical record for the legion is robust until around the year 108. An inscription from that date found at York confirms the legion was present and rebuilding its fortress in stone, a sign of permanent establishment. And then nothing. The Ninth Legion simply drops out of all surviving records. It does not appear on a later list of active legions compiled around the year 165. A legion that had existed for centuries was just gone. The most dramatic and popular theory, immortalized in books and films, is that the legion was annihilated in a catastrophic battle against the northern tribes. The rough, untamed territory north of Hadrian's Wall, which wasn't even built until the 120s, was a place of immense danger for Roman forces. The landscape was perfect for ambushes, and the tribes were fiercely resistant to Roman rule. The theory suggests that the 9th was ordered on a punitive campaign deep into Caledonia to crush a major uprising. Somewhere in the misty glens or dense forests, the disciplined Roman column could have been lured into a trap, surrounded, and systematically destroyed by a force that knew the land intimately. The complete destruction of a legion was a rare and shocking event for Rome, a national trauma that the empire might have wished to suppress in its official histories. This idea paints a powerful and haunting picture: the rusted, discarded armor, the silent dead, and the complete erasure of a military unit so total that its eagles were never recovered, its story never told. It's a narrative that resonates deeply with the romantic vision of a noble, civilized force being overwhelmed by the raw, primal power of the wilderness. However, many historians point to a significant lack of archaeological evidence to support this catastrophic end. While there are sites of Roman military defeats in Britain, such as the Battle of Mons Graupius, no single location has yielded the concentrated debris field one would expect from the loss of 5,000 men, the scattered coins, broken weapons, and mass graves that typically mark such a disaster. This absence has given rise to a more administrative, though no less fascinating, explanation. The Roman Empire was a vast machine constantly juggling its military resources to plug gaps along its extensive frontiers. It is entirely possible that the 9th Legion was simply transferred out of Britain. Around the time of its disappearance, the Emperor Hadrian was embarking on his tour of the provinces, and major conflicts were flaring up in the Eastern Empire, particularly in Judea against the Bar Kokhba revolt and along the Danube frontier. A veteran legion like the 9th would have been a prime candidate for redeployment to these hotspots. The bureaucratic paperwork confirming its move could have been lost to time, or its transfer might have been so rushed and chaotic in the face of a crisis that it was never properly documented in the first place. In this scenario, the legion may have been wiped out later in a different conflict far from Britain, its identity fading into the obscurity of the empire's endless border wars. A third theory offers a middle path, suggesting the legion met its end not in one grand battle, but through a process of gradual attrition. The northern frontier was a constant drain on Roman manpower through relentless guerrilla warfare, disease, and desertion. It's possible the 9th was so badly mauled in a series of punishing, small-scale engagements that it ceased to be an effective fighting force. Rather than being gloriously wiped out, it may have been quietly disbanded for dishonor or merged with another legion to hide the embarrassment of its losses, its number retired and its shameful history deliberately omitted from the records. The fate of the 9th Legion remains a blank page in history, a silence that we have filled with our own stories of defiance and disaster. It stands as a stark reminder that even the most powerful and organized empires can lose things in the fog, entire legions, and the truth of their final march. But our journey into the shadows of history now takes us from the foggy fate of a lost legion to the arid, sun-scorched landscape of the Judean desert, where a discovery was made that presented a mystery not of vanishing people, but of vanishing wealth. In 1952, archaeologists were investigating a cave near the site where the famous Dead Sea Scrolls had been found at Qumran. These scrolls were some of the most significant historical and religious documents ever unearthed, consisting of ancient biblical texts and community rules. But what they found in this particular cave, now known as Cave 3, was utterly different. It wasn't written on fragile parchment or papyrus. It was a scroll made of copper, a material chosen not for its ease of use but for its permanence. And the message it bore was not a sacred psalm or a book of prophecy. It was a list, a detailed, incredibly specific inventory of unimaginable treasure and the cryptic instructions on how to find it. This is the mystery of the copper scroll. The physical nature of the scroll itself was a massive puzzle. Because copper is so rigid, the scroll had to be cut into two separate rolls to be opened, a delicate process that took years to accomplish. Once opened, the text revealed itself to be written in a form of Hebrew that was different from the other Dead Sea Scrolls, with some letters and spellings that seemed more akin to a later period. But the real shock was the content. It doesn't speak of spiritual matters. It reads like a frantic, ancient treasure map. It lists 64 different hiding places, and the amounts of precious metals said to be concealed there are staggering. We're not talking about a few coins or ceremonial cups. The scroll describes over 4,600 talents of gold and silver, along with vast quantities of precious spices, perfumes, and other valuables. To put that into perspective, a single talent was roughly 75 pounds. This list points to a hoard that would weigh hundreds of tons and be worth billions of dollars in today's currency. It describes specific locations with almost maddening precision, mentioning landmarks like ruins, dams, caves, and specific tombs. For example, one entry might say, "In the ruin that is in the valley of Achor, buried 4 cubits under the southern corner, 70 talents of silver." It gives you just enough information to drive you mad, but not enough to actually find anything, as the landmarks it names have been utterly lost to 2,000 years of erosion, war, and the relentless passage of time. This immediately presents the central, burning question. Is this a literal, factual list of real treasure, or is it something else entirely? The sheer, unbelievable scale of the wealth is the biggest argument against its literal truth. The amounts described are so vast that they dwarf the entire treasury of any kingdom in the region during that era. It would be like finding a modern list claiming someone had hidden the entire gold reserves of Fort Knox in various backyards across a single state. It seems logistically impossible. This has led many scholars to propose that the treasure is symbolic, perhaps representing the vast wealth of the Second Temple in Jerusalem before its destruction by the Romans in 70 AD. The scroll could be a symbolic record, a way for a devout community to preserve in metal the memory of their lost sacred wealth, ensuring that even if the physical items were looted, their memory and spiritual value would be etched permanently into copper. Alternatively, it could be a work of folklore or religious fantasy, a vision of a heavenly treasure or a promised reward for the righteous. Yet, the very specific, non-symbolic nature of the writing argues for a real treasure. The instructions are dry and administrative, not poetic or visionary. They read like a real inventory written by someone who was desperately trying to record crucial information for future recovery. Proponents of the literal theory suggest the treasure might not be from a single source. It could represent the combined, hidden wealth of many Jewish communities from across the region, pooled together and hidden for safekeeping during the violent Jewish revolts against Rome. The Qumran community itself, often associated with the Essenes, may have been the guardians of this secret, tasked with preserving the list even if they themselves could not recover the hoard. The hunt for the copper scroll treasure has consumed adventurers and archaeologists for decades. Expeditions have been mounted, using the scroll's clues to dig at the feet of specific mountains, in dry riverbeds and around ancient ruins. Some have even claimed to find small, tantalizing pieces of evidence, like ancient nails or broken pottery near described locations, but the colossal fortune itself has remained stubbornly hidden. The land has changed too much and the clues are too obscure. The copper scroll endures as a unique paradox. It is the most straightforward of the Dead Sea Scrolls in its wording, yet it is the most mysterious in its intent. It promises a tangible, physical reward, yet it may ultimately be a map to a spiritual truth. It sits at the crossroads of faith and greed, history and legend, challenging us to decide whether we are reading a financial record or a sacred text, and whether the real treasure was ever meant to be found with a shovel or only with the heart. Emerging from the cryptic instructions of the copper scroll, our next mystery presents us with an object so immense, so visually arresting, that its very existence seems to defy the limits of human endurance. Nestled within the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm is a book that dwarfs all others from its era. It is called the Codex Gigas, but history remembers it by a far more evocative and terrifying name, the Devil's Bible. This is not just a book, it is a monolith of vellum and ink, a medieval masterpiece shrouded in a legend so dark that it claims its creation was not a work of devotion, but a pact with the devil himself. To understand why this book sparked such a fearsome rumor, you first have to appreciate its staggering physicality. The Codex Gigas is the largest known medieval manuscript in the world. It stands nearly 3 feet tall, 20 inches wide, and is almost 9 inches thick. It is constructed from the skins of an estimated 160 donkeys, requiring the complete destruction of entire herds to provide its pages. It weighs a back-breaking 165 pounds, so heavy that it reportedly requires 2 people to lift it safely. Within this colossal frame lies a complete Latin Vulgate Bible, but that is only the beginning. It also contains a slew of other crucial texts, the entire works of the Jewish historian Josephus, a comprehensive encyclopedia of medical knowledge by St. Isidore of Seville, a chronicle of Bohemian history, various spells and formulas for exorcism, and a calendar of saints' days. It is a 1-volume library, a complete summation of the world's knowledge as understood by a medieval monk, all written in a remarkably consistent hand. And this is the core of the mystery. Based on the sheer volume of text and the incredibly uniform penmanship, it has been estimated that a single scribe, writing alone and working 10 hours a day, would have needed anywhere from 20 to 30 years of non-stop labor to complete it. The notion that one man could achieve this is so superhuman that it inevitably gave birth to a supernatural explanation. The legend, first recorded centuries after the book's creation, offers a hauntingly simple reason for this impossible feat. It tells of a monk who had broken his monastic vows and was sentenced to be walled up alive, a horrifying punishment known as immurement. In his utter despair and facing a slow, agonizing death, the monk made a desperate offer. He promised to create, in a single night, a book that would contain all human knowledge and bring everlasting glory to his monastery. As midnight approached and he realized the task was hopeless, he uttered a prayer, not to God, but to the fallen archangel Lucifer. Satan himself appeared, and the monk pledged his soul in exchange for the book's completion. The devil finished the manuscript, and the monk, in gratitude, added a full-page portrait of his new patron. This is the origin of the book's most famous and chilling feature, a massive, full-page illustration of the devil. He is depicted alone on the page, a monstrous figure with clawed hands and feet, a bestial face with twin horns and a lolling tongue, and a body covered in white fur, squatting menacingly between 2 towers. The page opposite this terrifying image is tellingly left blank, as if no holy text could safely reside next to such a profane presence. But how much of this eerie tale can we believe? Historians and codicologists who have studied the Codex Gigas have pieced together a far more human, though no less fascinating, story. The manuscript was almost certainly created in the early 13th century at the Benedictine monastery of Podlažis in Bohemia, modern-day Czech Republic. While the text is indeed remarkably uniform, advanced analysis has revealed the work of a single, incredibly dedicated scribe. This was not the work of a night, but of a lifetime. The monk's identity is lost, but we can infer his character. He was a man of profound discipline, immense learning, and unwavering devotion. He likely saw the creation of this comprehensive volume as his life's work, the ultimate act of piety to glorify God and his monastery. The infamous devil illustration, rather than being a tribute, was probably intended as a standard medieval warning, a vivid depiction of the enemy of God, a common feature in religious texts of the time meant to inspire faithful vigilance against sin. The legend of the demonic pact likely grew generations later, a folk tale concocted to explain the seemingly superhuman effort required to create such a monumental object. It was a story too good, too terrifying, and too memorable not to be repeated, eventually eclipsing the true story of devout, scholarly toil. The book's subsequent history is as turbulent as its origins are murky. In the 1500s, it was taken as a prized war trophy by the Swedish army from Prague Castle during the 30 Years' War, and it has remained in Sweden ever since. The Codex Gigas endures as a powerful symbol of the medieval mind's capacity for both profound faith and terrifying superstition. It represents the eternal human struggle between good and evil, a struggle literally bound within its massive covers. It asks us whether we choose to see a testament to demonic intervention or a monument to the incredible, almost inhuman power of human devotion and focus. The true mystery of the Devil's Bible may not be whether a devil helped write it, but what a single human being, driven by faith and obsession, is truly capable of achieving. Yet, even as we grapple with the immense physical and spiritual mystery of the Codex Gigas, our journey now leaps across the Atlantic Ocean to a mystery born from the very edge of the medieval world's expansion. While the era of knights and castles was drawing to a close, the spirit of medieval exploration, with all its courage, superstition, and peril, was very much alive. And nowhere is this more evident than in the baffling fate of the first English attempt to plant a permanent colony in the New World. This is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, a tale of hope that vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind a single, cryptic word that has taunted historians for centuries: Croatoan. The year was 1587. Queen Elizabeth I's favorite courtier, Sir Walter Raleigh, had been granted a charter to establish a colony in the territory he named Virginia in honor of the Virgin Queen. An initial reconnaissance mission had already mapped the area and returned with glowing reports, and a first group of soldiers had attempted to settle there, though they ultimately abandoned the post and returned to England. This time it was to be different. This was to be a true community. The new expedition was led by an artist and gentleman named John White, and it included not just soldiers but entire families, men, women, and even children, over 100 people in total. They were carpenters, farmers, and craftsmen, all intending to build a new life. Among them was White's own daughter, Elena, who was married to Ananias Dare. Shortly after their arrival, Elena gave birth to a baby girl on August 18, 1587. She was named Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. But the situation was already precarious. Supplies were running low, and relations with the local Secotan people, initially cautious but manageable, were deteriorating rapidly following the hostilities from the previous military group. Faced with a desperate situation, the colonists persuaded John White to sail back to England to plead for more supplies and reinforcements. It was an agonizing decision for White, who was leaving behind his daughter and newborn granddaughter, but he agreed, promising a swift return. That return was anything but swift. White's timing could not have been worse. His ship arrived in England just as the nation was bracing for the monumental threat of the Spanish Armada. Every capable ship was commandeered for the defense of the realm. For 3 long years, John White was trapped, unable to secure a vessel to return to his family. It was not until 1590, after the Armada had been defeated, that he finally managed to set sail back to Roanoke. When he and his crew finally reached the island in August of that year, they were met with an eerie and complete silence. The settlement was deserted, the fort had been dismantled, and the houses had been carefully taken down, not destroyed or burned, suggesting a planned and orderly departure rather than a panicked flight. There were no signs of a struggle, no graves and no cross, a pre-arranged signal they had agreed upon to indicate the colonists had been in dire distress. The only clue was a word carved into a wooden post, Croatoan, and on a nearby tree the letters CR had been etched. This was not a random scrawl, it was deliberate. Before White had left, he had specifically instructed the colonists that if they were forced to leave Roanoke, they should carve their destination into a tree or post. If they were in danger as they left, they were to carve a Maltese cross above the name. There was no cross, the word stood alone, so what did Croatoan mean? It was the name of a barrier island to the south, modern-day Hatteras Island, and more importantly, the name of a group of Native Americans who lived there. The Croatoans were a people distinct from the more hostile Secotans on the mainland, and they had actually developed a friendly relationship with the English during earlier expeditions. Their leader, Manteo, had even traveled to England and returned to act as an intermediary. This single word has since become the linchpin for every theory about the colony's fate. The most widely accepted theory, and the one that aligns with John White's own belief, is integration. The colonists, facing starvation and hostile neighbors, decided to exercise their contingency plan. They dismantled their homes for the materials and traveled south to live with their Croatoan allies. Over generations, they would have intermarried and been absorbed into the tribe, their English identity gradually fading into Native American culture. This theory is supported by decades of later reports from English settlers at Jamestown, who arrived 20 years later. They heard persistent rumors from various Powhatan tribes about people who looked and dressed like Englishmen living further south. Captain John Smith himself was told of villages with walled houses and two-story stone buildings, details that sounded European. The most compelling account came from Jamestown's governor, who reported being told of a massacre of most of the white colonists by a powerful chief, but that a remainder had been spared and lived as adopted members of the tribes. Other theories are far darker. One suggests the colony was wiped out by the Spanish, who considered English claims in the New World a direct threat. Spanish records from Florida show they were indeed aware of the Roanoke settlement and had dispatched a reconnaissance mission to find and eliminate it. However, when they arrived at the location, they found the colony already abandoned. Another possibility is that the colonists attempted to sail back to England on their own in a small ship left behind for coastal exploration and were lost at sea in a storm. Or perhaps they tried to move inland to the Chesapeake Bay area, their original intended destination, and met with disaster or conflict there. The complete lack of archaeological evidence on Roanoke Island itself has always been a major stumbling block, but recent excavations on Hatteras Island have begun to turn up fascinating artifacts that may finally provide clues. Researchers have found a gold signet ring from the 16th century, a slate writing tablet, the hilt of an English iron rapier, and parts of guns that have been reworked into tools, all suggesting a prolonged, peaceful interaction and integration between Europeans and natives at that specific location. The enduring power of the Roanoke story lies in its heartbreaking human scale. This wasn't a vanished army or a lost legion. It was a community of families, a grandfather who spent the rest of his life wondering what happened to his child, a baby who became a symbol of hope and then a ghost. The mystery of the lost colony is the ultimate cliffhanger, a story interrupted at its most critical moment. It represents the terrifying fragility of those first tentative steps into a vast unknown world, a single word serving as the only bridge between a known past and an unknowable future. But while the New World was presenting its own enigmas, the misty hills of medieval Ireland were guarding a relic of an entirely different nature, one whose power was said to be not of this earth. Deep within the hallowed collection of the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin rests a simple, unassuming object, a small, squat iron bell, blackened by age and resting in an ornate shrine crafted centuries after its making. This is the bell of St. Patrick, and its journey from a humble tool of faith to a national treasure wrapped in miracle and legend. is a story that echoes the very soul of early Christian Ireland. The bell's origin story is inextricably linked to Ireland's patron saint himself. According to tradition, this was the very bell St. Patrick used in the 5th century to call the faithful to prayer as he traversed the island, converting pagan kings and founding monasteries. It is said the sound of this bell had a supernatural quality, able to be heard for miles across the quiet Irish landscape, a clear, pure tone that was believed to ward off evil spirits and protect the saint from the many dangers he faced. The legends that grew around it speak of its incredible power. One tale claims that when a chieftain attempted to steal the bell, the iron became so impossibly heavy his horses could not budge it. Another tells of how it would ring out on its own to warn of approaching danger or to signal a great victory. It wasn't merely a tool, it was seen as a vessel of Patrick's own holiness, a physical conduit for divine protection and authority. For centuries after Patrick's death, the bell was cared for by a dedicated hereditary keeper, known as the Corb, meaning heir of St. Patrick. This keeper from the Oacute Malchinair family was not a priest but a layperson whose sacred duty was to transport and protect the bell. Its power was considered so potent that it was brought onto the battlefield as a kind of divine standard, a practice known as the Law of the Bell. Irish chieftains and even high kings would have the bell present during musters of their troops, believing its presence would guarantee victory and legitimize their cause. It was the ultimate symbol of spiritual sanction in a land where politics and faith were deeply intertwined. The reverence for the object was so great that by the year 1123, a magnificent shrine was commissioned for it by the High King of Ireland, Domhnall Ua Lochlein. This stunning piece of medieval artistry made of gold, silver, bronze, and crystal was created not to contain the bell, but to glorify it, to be a fitting reliquary for an object that had transcended its simple form to become a national icon. The survival of both the bell and its shrine is a miracle in itself, having weathered Viking raids, Norman invasions, and centuries of political turmoil. Scientific analysis of the bell confirms its antiquity. It is a true early medieval iron bell, created using a technique where a flat sheet of iron is bent and riveted into a four-sided form, a style consistent with the era of St. Patrick. While we can never definitively prove it was touched by the saint's own hands, its historical and cultural significance is undeniable. It stands as a powerful testament to the deep, enduring faith of early Christian Ireland, a tangible link to a time when the divine felt immediate and accessible, its power resonating in the clear, ringing tone of a simple iron bell. Moving from the sacred resonance of St. Patrick's bell, we now turn to a mystery that represents the ultimate symbol of earthly power and its shocking dissolution. If the bell embodies the enduring spirit of faith, our next enigma is about the physical manifestation of an empire's authority, lost in an explosion of greed and violence. This is the story of the lost crown of Byzantium, and it begins with one of the most devastating acts of betrayal in medieval history, the sack of Constantinople in 1204. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire stood as the glittering heir to Rome, a bastion of Christianity, art, and unimaginable wealth. Its capital, Constantinople, was protected by legendary walls and filled with palaces and churches housing relics and treasures accumulated over a millennia. The imperial regalia, the crowns, scepters, and robes of the emperors, were not just jewelry. They were sacred objects believed to be imbued with divine authority, connecting the ruler directly to God. The most iconic of these was the crown likely worn by emperors like Justinian and Basil II, a masterpiece of gold and gems that symbolized the unbroken line of power stretching back to Augustus Caesar. This was the crown of Byzantium. The empire's downfall came from an unexpected source, fellow Christians. The Fourth Crusade, originally intended to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control, was hijacked by Venetian commercial interests and the ambitions of a deposed Byzantine prince. When the Crusaders could not pay the Venetians for their fleet, they were persuaded to attack the Christian city of Zara and then ultimately Constantinople itself to install a puppet emperor who would pay their debts. The plan spiraled into catastrophe. In April of 1204, the Crusaders breached the walls and unleashed a 3-day frenzy of destruction and looting the likes of which Europe had never seen. Ancient statues were melted down for their bronze, libraries were burned, nuns were assaulted in their convents, and the high altar of the magnificent Hagia Sophia was hacked apart for its gold. The systematic pillaging was not merely wanton violence, it was a calculated stripping of an empire's soul, and at the heart of this orgy of plunder was the imperial treasury. The Crusaders, many of whom were minor knights from France and Flanders, suddenly found themselves holding riches beyond their wildest dreams. They pried gems from icons, stripped silk from altars, and most importantly, they seized the imperial regalia. This is where the historical record becomes a tangled web. We know the regalia was looted. Chroniclers like Geoffroy de Villehardouin, who participated in the crusade, described the division of the spoils, with treasures being shipped back to Venice and distributed among the crusading leaders. The most famous booty, the 4 bronze horses of the Hippodrome, still stand atop St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. But the ultimate fate of the core imperial regalia, the crown, the orb, the scepter, and the specific robes of state, is one of history's great silences. The most persistent theory suggests that the crown eventually found its way into the hands of Boniface of Montferrat, one of the Crusade's leaders who became the king of Thessalonica. From there, the trail supposedly leads westward. Some historians speculate it was passed down through his family and may have been sold or given to a European monarch, perhaps a king of Castile or France, eager to legitimize their own rule with such a potent symbol. Another tantalizing possibility is that it entered the treasury of the Holy Roman Empire, whose emperors often dreamed of reviving a unified Roman Empire with themselves at its head. Possessing the actual crown of Constantinople would have been a powerful step in that direction. The significance of recovering these objects cannot be overstated. Finding the lost crown would be more than a discovery of fabulous wealth. It would be the recovery of a direct physical link to the Roman Empire itself. It would allow historians to study the craftsmanship, metallurgy, and iconography of supreme power in the medieval world. Each gemstone, each etching in the gold, would tell a story about the empire's economy, its trade routes, and its artistic influences. But beyond the academic value, the crown holds immense symbolic power. For Greece and other nations that see themselves as the heirs to Byzantium, its recovery would be a profoundly emotional event, a tangible reconnection to a glorious past that was brutally severed in 1204. It represents the restoration of a broken narrative, a chance to literally hold a piece of the empire that preserved classical knowledge through the Dark Ages and acted as a bulwark between East and West for 1,000 years. The search for the lost crown of Byzantium is a search for the very heart of a vanished world, a glittering ghost that haunts the vaults and cathedrals of Europe, waiting to reveal the final chapter of its long, silent exile. Yet as we contemplate the vanished splendor of Byzantium's crown, our path now leads us to a mystery of an entirely different nature, one not of lost objects but of hidden knowledge, a secret so potent it is said to have driven a man to madness and transformed a sleepy French village into the epicenter of modern conspiracy theory. This is the endlessly intricate puzzle of Rennes-le-Château, a tale that begins with a seemingly insignificant country priest and spirals outward to encompass medieval heresy, royal bloodlines, and treasure beyond imagining. In 1885, a young abbé named François Bérenger Saunière arrived at his new parish, the decrepit church of Sainte Marie Madeleine in the impoverished, remote village of Rennes-le-Château, nestled in the foothills of the French Pyrenees. The church was in a state of near ruin, and the new priest was so poor he had to borrow money for his mass wine. For years, his life was one of quiet, unremarkable poverty. Then, around 1891, something changed. During a modest restoration of his church, Saunier allegedly discovered something. The most common version of the story claims he found 4 encrypted parchments hidden inside one of the ancient, hollow Visigoth pillars that supported the altar. These documents, written in a complex code, were said to contain a tremendous secret. Whatever it was, it transformed Saunier's life overnight. Suddenly, the penniless priest had access to a seemingly endless fortune. He embarked on a wildly extravagant spending spree that bewildered his humble parishioners. He completely restored the church in a bizarre and eclectically ornate style, adding strange statues, a dramatic diorama of the Stations of the Cross, and above the entrance, a chilling Latin inscription, Terribilis est locus est. This place is terrible, a phrase meaning it was awesome and fearsome, taken from the story of Jacob's ladder. He built a luxurious villa with a magnificent library, an ornate garden filled with mythological statues, and a towering neo-Gothic structure called the Tour Magdala, which served as his private study overlooking the valley. He hosted lavish parties for dignitaries, corresponded with European nobility, and spent money with a recklessness that eventually drew the suspicion of his bishop. When the church investigated the source of his wealth, Saunier refused to explain, was suspended from his duties, and died in 1917 without ever revealing his secret, taking the truth to his grave. The central question, of course, is what did he find? The first and most materialistic theory is literal treasure. The region is steeped in history. Rennes-le-Château stands on the site of an ancient Visigoth fortress, and the Visigoths famously sacked Rome in 410, looting immense wealth, including perhaps the treasure from the Temple of Jerusalem. Another legend claims this was the hiding place of the treasure of the Cathars, smuggled from Montségur before the fall. Perhaps Saunier stumbled upon a hidden cache of gold coins or priceless jewels, funding his transformation from pauper to king of his own hilltop domain. But for many, the treasure was not gold, but knowledge, a historical secret so explosive it was worth blackmailing the Vatican itself to ensure a steady flow of hush money. This is where the story dives deep into the realm of heresy. In the 1960s, this local mystery was catapulted into international fame by books like The Holy Blood and The Holy Grail, which proposed a breathtaking hypothesis. The authors suggested the parchments did not point to gold, but to proof that Jesus Christ did not die on the cross. Instead, he married Mary Magdalene, fled to France, and founded a royal bloodline, the Merovingian dynasty of early French kings. This holy bloodline, or Sang-Real, which some reinterpret as Holy Grail, was then protected for centuries by a secret society, the Priory of Sion, with alleged members including Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton. According to this theory, Saunier discovered documents proving this lineage, and the Vatican, threatened by a claim that would undermine the very foundation of Christ's divinity and the Church's authority, paid him a fortune to keep it silent. This narrative brilliantly wove together the village mystery with the legends of the Cathars, the Knights Templar who were suggested as the military arm of the Priory of Sion, and the idea of a lost, sacred feminine principle embodied by Mary Magdalene. A third perspective suggests the secret was spiritual rather than historical. The church in Rennes-le-Château is dedicated to Mary Magdalene, a figure associated with esoteric Christianity and Gnostic beliefs. Perhaps Saunier discovered evidence of a forgotten, heretical rite or a spiritual truth that offered a different path to salvation, one that bypassed the Orthodox Church. His unusual church renovations are often read as a coded message, full of inverted symbolism and cryptic clues pointing to this alternative belief system. His wealth in this light could have come from a wealthy, secretive patron who shared these esoteric views and funded his work. The truth is likely a complex tapestry woven from all these threads with a heavy dose of human fallibility. Skeptical investigators have pointed to more mundane explanations, including evidence that Saunier was a clever fraud who made his money through a massive, illegal trade in masses, charging fees for saying thousands of fraudulent prayers for the dead, and that the entire legend of the parchments was an elaborate fabrication later amplified by hoaxers and imaginative authors. Yet the sheer endurance of the mystery speaks to its power. Rennes le Chateau is less about a single historical truth and more about a perfect cultural storm. It offers a compelling narrative that connects dots between disparate historical events, promising a hidden history behind the one we know. It taps into our deep desire for there to be more to the world, more mystery, more conspiracy, more lost treasure and earth-shattering secrets waiting just beneath the surface of a sleepy village. It is a modern myth in the making, a mystery that continues to beguile because its answer is not a simple fact, but a reflection of everything we wish could be true. Leaving behind the tangled web of European conspiracy, we now journey across the Atlantic to a mystery etched into the very stone of the American Southwest. High on the sheer cliff faces of Mesa Verde, in the arid canyons of Choco, and across the Four Corners region, stand the silent, breathtaking ruins of a people who mastered a harsh land, only to vanish from it completely. This is the puzzle of the ancestral Pueblones, a name meaning ancient ones, though they are more widely known by the Navajo word Anasazi, which translates to ancient enemies or enemies of our ancestors. Their story is one of incredible architectural genius and a sudden mass exodus that has left archaeologists searching for answers for over a century. Picture the landscape of the Colorado Plateau around the year 1100. This was not an empty wilderness but a thriving hub of sophisticated culture. The ancestral Pueblones were not primitive nomads, they were master builders, astronomers, and engineers. They constructed sprawling, multi-storied, great houses at Choco Canyon with hundreds of rooms aligned perfectly with solar and lunar cycles. They engineered a vast network of roads that stretched for hundreds of miles across the desert, connecting outlying communities to this central ceremonial complex. Most famously, they built entire villages tucked into high, south-facing cliff alcoves, like the stunning Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde. These were not just simple shelters, they were intricate apartments with towers, plazas, and sophisticated water catchment systems designed to harvest every precious drop of rain from the mesa tops. Their society was complex, their pottery was beautiful and intricate, and their connection to the land was profound. And then, by the end of the 13th century, it was all over. They walked away from their magnificent stone cities, their fields, and their sacred kivas, leaving behind pots, tools, and even food stores as if they intended to return any moment. They never did, so what could cause an entire civilization to abandon its homeland? The most compelling suspect is a profound and prolonged shift in the climate, a mega drought that gripped the region for decades. Tree ring data, a science called dendrochronology, provides a starkly clear record of this catastrophe. The rings show a period of exceptional rainfall and growth in the 11th century, which corresponds perfectly with the cultural fluorescence at Choco Canyon. But the data then reveals a terrifying turn. A severe drought began around 1130, and then a truly devastating 50-year mega drought set in from 1276 to 1299. In an environment where survival was already a precarious balance, this was a death sentence. Springs and streams dried up, the water tables dropped, and agriculture became impossible. The very strategies that had allowed them to thrive, their sophisticated dry land farming techniques, were no match for a climate that had turned permanently against them. The stones of their great houses still stand, but the lifeblood of the land had drained away. Yet climate change alone may not tell the whole story. Such a severe environmental crisis would have inevitably triggered intense social and religious upheaval. Archaeologists have found unsettling evidence of violence in this period. Some sites show signs of burned kivas, unburied bodies, and even evidence of cannibalism. This has led to theories that the drought fractured society, pitting community against community in a desperate struggle for dwindling resources. The social contract that had held their world together may have shattered under the strain of starvation and fear. Their complex religious beliefs, which were deeply tied to the land and the rain, would have been thrown into crisis. If their prayers and ceremonies could no longer bring the life-giving rain, the authority of the religious leaders would have collapsed, and the entire cosmological order of their world would have fallen apart. The act of leaving may have been as much a spiritual rejection of a failed system as a practical response to famine. But if they left, where did they go? The vanishing act is not a disappearance from history, but a migration and a transformation. The ancestral Pueblones did not vanish into thin air. They migrated south and east, joining their distant relatives who were already living in areas with more reliable water sources, particularly along the Rio Grande in New Mexico and the mesas of Arizona. Their legacy is living and breathing today in the Pueblo people. The Hopi, the Zuni, the Acoma, and the Pueblos of the Rio Grande. These modern tribes are the direct descendants of the so-called Anasazi. They did not see their ancestors' movement as a mysterious disappearance, but as a necessary migration, a strategic consolidation of their people into stronger, more defensible communities where they could preserve their culture. The stories and oral histories of the Pueblo tribes speak of this journey, of leaving the old world behind to ensure their survival in a new one. The mystery, then, is not so much a where did they go, but a why did they leave so completely. The answer lies in a perfect storm of environmental catastrophe that unraveled the social and spiritual fabric of a civilization, forcing a people to walk away from their magnificent stone homes and begin anew, carrying their identity with them not in buildings, but in their shared memory and enduring traditions. But perhaps no single object straddles the line between faith and science, between relic and riddle, more dramatically than a simple piece of linen kept in a cathedral in northern Italy. This is the Shroud of Turin, a 14-foot-long cloth that bears the faint, haunting imprint of a man who appears to have suffered the brutal torture and crucifixion of ancient Roman practice. To millions of believers, it is the sacred burial shroud of Jesus Christ himself, a divine self-portrait created at the moment of resurrection. To skeptics, it is the most brilliant, perplexing, and controversial forgery in history. Its story is a battle between devout conviction and empirical evidence, a mystery that has endured for over 600 years and only deepens with every new attempt to solve it. The shroud first appears in the historical record with a burst of controversy. In the 1350s, a French knight named Geoffroy de Charny presented the cloth to the canons of a church he founded in Liège, France. Almost immediately, it became a popular object of veneration, drawing pilgrims from across the region. This popularity, however, sparked a swift and official backlash. The local bishop, Henry of Poitiers, investigated the shroud and declared it a clever fraud, stating that the artist who had painted it had even confessed. Despite this damning pronouncement from a high-ranking church authority, the shroud's appeal persisted. It passed through the hands of the de Charny family and eventually to the powerful House of Savoy, which moved it to Turin in 1578, where it has remained, housed in the royal chapel of the Turin Cathedral ever since. This shaky start is a critical part of the mystery. If it is authentic, why does it vanish from history for 1300 years only to surface in medieval France? If it is a forgery, what incredible technique could have created such an inexplicable image? The modern scientific investigation of the shroud began in earnest in the 19th century, but it was a photograph taken in 1898 that truly ignited the controversy. Secondo Pia, an Italian amateur photographer, was granted permission to take the first pictures of the relic. As he developed the glass plate negatives in his darkroom, he experienced a moment of stunned revelation. The image on the negative was not a faint, ghostly positive. It was a startlingly clear and detailed positive photograph. The negative revealed the face of a man with three-dimensional quality, possessing a depth and clarity that was completely invisible to the naked eye. This meant the shroud itself was, in effect, a natural photographic negative created over 1,000 years before the invention of photography. This discovery transformed the debate, pushing it beyond matters of faith and into the realm of empirical science. How could a medieval forger have conceived of and executed a perfect negative image, a concept that wouldn't be understood for centuries? The 20th century saw a series of increasingly sophisticated examinations. Teams of scientists, dubbed STURP the Shroud of Turin Research Project, were granted unprecedented access in 1978. For 5 days, they subjected the cloth to every non-destructive test they could devise: X-ray fluorescence, infrared thermography, ultraviolet photography, and microscopic analysis. Their findings were as puzzling as the shroud itself. They confirmed there were no pigments, paints, or dyes on the cloth. The image was not painted on. It resides only on the very topmost microfibers of the linen threads, a superficial discoloration akin to a scorch. They found the stains identified as blood were indeed real blood, and further analysis confirmed it was male human blood of the type AB. Most bafflingly, they concluded that the image contained precise three-dimensional information, something no known artistic technique of any era could achieve. The data seemed to point toward some form of energy release, a brief, intense burst of radiation that scorched the cloth from the body outward, perfectly encoding a three-dimensional form onto a two-dimensional surface. The STURP team ultimately published its conclusion, stating that the image was that of a real human form of a crucified man, and that while the science could not explain how the image got there, it could conclusively say what it was not the product of an artist. The seeming scientific vindication was dramatically challenged a decade later. In 1988, the Vatican granted permission for a new, definitive test, radiocarbon dating. A small sample from a corner of the shroud was carefully cut, divided, and sent to 3 of the world's most prestigious labs at the universities of Oxford, Arizona, and Zurich. The process was meticulously controlled to prevent contamination, and all 3 labs worked independently. The results, announced in a stunning press conference, were unanimous. The flax plants used to make the linen had been harvested sometime between 1260 and 1390. The shroud, science declared, was medieval. For many, this was the final word. It was a forgery created precisely when it first appeared in history. Case closed. Yet, as with everything surrounding this cloth, the carbon dating results did not end the debate. They simply refueled it. Proponents of the shroud's authenticity immediately raised serious objections. They argued the sample taken was from a corner of the cloth that had been handled, mended, and contaminated over centuries. They pointed to the documented history of the shroud surviving a fire in 1532, which may have introduced carbon isotopes from the smoke and water used to douse the flames, skewing the date younger. Some textile experts have since argued that the sample area contained cotton fibers woven in with the linen, suggesting it was part of a medieval repair invisible to the naked eye, a common practice for revered relics. If the tested piece was a patch and not part of the original cloth, the carbon dating would be irrelevant to the shroud's true age. These objections have kept the question open for believers and a minority of scientists, creating a stalemate where faith and fact remain in an uneasy standoff. The true, enduring mystery of the Shroud of Turin is not merely its age, but its very existence. How was the image made? If it is a medieval forgery, the artist employed a method that remains beyond our understanding to replicate even with modern technology. Theories for its creation are as varied as they are imaginative. Some propose it was an early photographic technique using a camera obscura and silver compounds. Others suggest a primitive form of rubbing or bas relief. There is even a hypothesis involving the use of acid. Yet, no proposed method has successfully recreated all the unique characteristics of the shroud: the lack of pigment, the superficial penetration, the perfect negative quality, and the encoded three-dimensional data. The most profound theory, of course, is the one that aligns with faith, that the image was formed at the moment of resurrection by a miraculous burst of divine energy, a theory that, while scientifically untestable, aligns perfectly with the bizarre radiation-like properties scientists observed. The Shroud of Turin therefore stands as the ultimate Rorschach test. What you see in its faint, sepia-toned stains depends entirely on what you bring to it. For the faithful, it is a tangible sign, a silent witness to the central event of their belief. For the scientist, it is an unsolved problem, a collection of data points that refuse to form a coherent picture. It is a medieval artifact that continues to defy the medieval world's understanding, a puzzle that challenges the very limits of both history and science. It is not merely a piece of cloth, but a mirror reflecting our eternal struggle to find proof for what we feel must be true, a ghostly image that continues to ask the most profound question of all. From the ethereal mystery of the Shroud, we now journey back to the brutal, sun-scorched realities of the First Crusade, where an entire army of 10,000 warriors vanished into the thin air of the Anatolian plateau. This is not a legend of a relic, but a chilling historical disappearance recorded by multiple chroniclers of the era, the inexplicable fate of the lost Armenian legion. In the spring of 1097, the armies of the First Crusade were a collection of desperate, determined men marching toward Jerusalem. Among them was a formidable contingent, not of Franks from Western Europe, but of Christian soldiers from a recently independent Armenian kingdom in Cilicia. These were the forces of Constantine I, the Lord of Armenian Cilicia, a skilled and battle-hardened commander who had thrown his lot in with the Crusaders, seeing them as powerful allies against their common enemy, the Seljuk Turks who dominated the region. This Armenian contingent, numbering around 10,000 infantry and cavalry, was a significant and welcomed reinforcement for the Crusader princes. They knew the land, they knew the tactics of their Turkish adversaries, and their participation was a crucial strategic advantage for the European forces, who were strangers in a harsh and hostile land. The disaster unfolded as the combined armies, led by Bohemond of Taranto and other Crusader lords, marched toward the strategic city of Antioch. To speed their advance and secure a safer route, they split their forces, a decision that would prove catastrophic. The main vanguard, consisting of the Frankish knights, pushed ahead. The Armenian contingent, alongside other non-combatant pilgrims and a smaller group of Frankish infantry, found themselves isolated in the rear, strung out along the arduous path through the Anatolian highlands. They were dangerously vulnerable. Near the pass of Comana Pontica, the Seljuk Turks, under the command of the formidable Danishmend prince, saw their opportunity and struck with devastating force. The chronicler Albert of Aix provides the most detailed, harrowing account. He describes a fierce, running battle where the outnumbered and overwhelmed Armenians and their Frankish comrades were systematically cut down. The Seljuk horse archers, masters of mobile warfare, encircled them, raining down arrows before charging in to finish the work. The Crusader rearguard was, according to the sources, annihilated. The ground was littered with the dead, and those not killed were taken captive. The main Crusader army, miles ahead, could only learn of the destruction days later. The 10,000 Armenians and their Frankish companions had simply ceased to exist as a fighting force, but did total annihilation truly occur? While the contemporary chronicles present a picture of complete destruction, modern historians peer into the gaps in these narratives and propose other, more complex fates. The first and most tragic possibility is that the chroniclers were essentially correct. The Seljuks, enraged by the Armenian betrayal as they saw it, and eager to make an example, may have shown little mercy. The entire force could have been slaughtered on the battlefield, their bodies left to the elements, their story ending in that single, bloody afternoon. This would explain their complete disappearance from the Crusader order of battle, and the lack of any subsequent mention of them rejoining the main army. A second and equally plausible theory is mass enslavement. The Seljuks, like all powers of the era, considered captured soldiers a valuable commodity. The wholesale slaughter of 10,000 able-bodied men would have been an economic waste. It is far more likely that after the leaders and those who resisted fiercely were executed, the bulk of the rank and file soldiers, along with any camp followers, were rounded up and sold into slavery across the vast Seljuk Empire and beyond. Their fate would have been a life of brutal labor in mines or on galleys, or service as military slaves known as Mamluks, their identities and origins erased over time through forced conversion and assimilation. This slow, anonymous dissolution into the slave markets of the East would be another form of annihilation, just one that played out over years rather than hours. The most fascinating possibility, however, is one of assimilation. Could fragments of this lost legion have survived not as slaves, but as integrated members of local societies? The Armenian soldiers were, after all, in their home region. They spoke the languages, understood the customs, and shared a deep history with the land and its people, even with their Turkish rulers. It is not hard to imagine small groups escaping the main battle, fleeing into the rugged Armenian highlands and finding refuge in remote villages or with sympathetic local chieftains who were nominally under Seljuk control but maintained a degree of autonomy. There, they would have shed their military identities, married locally, and simply melted back into the population from which they had been drawn. Their crusade was over, survival was now the only priority. This theory suggests the legion didn't vanish, but rather dispersed, its individual members choosing obscurity over a hopeless fight, their bloodlines continuing but their collective story forgotten. The silence of the historical record regarding the Armenian legion after Comana Pontica is a profound one. It stands as a stark reminder that in the chaotic maelstrom of war, even an army of 10,000 can be swallowed by the land, leaving behind only questions and the faint, echoing whispers of a tragedy lost to time. Leaving behind the vanished armies and contested shrouds of the medieval world, we now turn our gaze upward to the stars themselves and to a mystery that bridges the ancient and medieval worlds in a single, breathtaking artifact. Tucked away in the halls of the Louvre Museum in Paris is a massive stone slab, intricately carved with the images of gods and strange hybrid creatures. This is the Zodiac of Dendera, an ancient Egyptian celestial map that, against all logic, found its way into the heart of medieval Europe, presenting scholars with a vision of the cosmos so advanced it threatened to unravel their entire understanding of God's creation. The slab itself, known to archaeologists as the Dendera Zodiac, is a stunning bas-relief that once adorned the ceiling of a chapel in the Temple of Cathar at Dendera, Egypt. Carved in the 1st century BC during the Greco-Roman period, it is a complex mix of Egyptian and Babylonian astronomical knowledge. It depicts the night sky as the ancient Egyptians saw it, a circular chart of the constellations with the familiar figures of Taurus the bull and Leo the lion, but also uniquely Egyptian decans, 36 star groups that rose consecutively on the horizon every 10 days, and the 5 planets known at the time, all orbiting around the North Star. For the priests of Cathar, this was a sacred calendar, a divine clockwork that governed religious festivals and agricultural cycles, linking the earthly realm directly to the mechanics of the heavens. The profound mystery is not its Egyptian origin, but its astonishing journey. This massive, multi-ton stone ceiling was somehow pried from its temple and transported across the Mediterranean Sea, appearing in France by the 1820s. But its influence in Europe began centuries earlier. While the physical slab arrived late, detailed drawings and descriptions of the zodiac had been circulating among European scholars and collectors since at least the 15th century. How did these detailed renderings of an ancient Egyptian artifact surface in medieval Europe? The most likely path is through the vibrant trade and intellectual networks that connected the Mediterranean world, even during the so-called Dark Ages. Venetian merchants, crusaders returning from the East, or perhaps even Byzantine scholars fleeing the fall of Constantinople in 1453, could have brought sketches or descriptions of the magnificent ceiling back with them. These renderings would have been incredible curiosities, prized possessions in the libraries of wealthy nobles and inquisitive churchmen, a secret window into a knowledge far older than their own. When medieval scholars first laid eyes on these drawings, their minds must have reeled. The Church's official cosmology, supported by the teachings of Aristotle and Ptolemy, placed a stationary Earth at the center of a series of perfect concentric crystalline spheres. This was a universe of divine order and hierarchy, but the zodiac of Dendera presented a completely different model. Its circular, representational map was not geocentric. It showed the constellations from a specific point in time and space, a snapshot of the sky that implied a spherical cosmos and a moving Earth. Even more startling was its incredible precision. The positions of the stars and planets were not mere decorations. They were plotted with an accuracy that medieval astronomy, reliant on outdated tables and complex armillary spheres, could scarcely match. Here was tangible proof that the so-called pagan ancients possessed an understanding of the heavens that might well surpass their own. This created an intense intellectual and theological dilemma. How could a civilization that predated Christ, a people who worshipped animal-headed gods, have achieved such sophisticated astronomical knowledge? For scholars daring enough to question, the zodiac was a bombshell. It suggested that true understanding of the natural world did not come solely from scripture or ancient Greek authorities, but from direct empirical observation, a concept that would later fuel the scientific revolution. The artifact became a silent, powerful ally for those who secretly doubted the geocentric model, a piece of physical evidence that whispered of a larger, more dynamic universe than the one the Church permitted them to see. It was a heretical thought made stone, a challenge to dogma that had crossed deserts and seas to plant a seed of cosmic doubt in the medieval mind. The zodiac of Dendera stands as a testament to the timeless human drive to map the heavens, and a reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are not new discoveries but very old truths waiting centuries for someone to rediscover them. Deep in the heart of Somerset, England, stands Glastonbury Abbey, a place where history and legend are so deeply intertwined that it is impossible to separate one from the other. This ancient site, believed by some to be the earliest Christian foundation in Britain, has long been associated with myths of the Holy Grail, Joseph of Arimathea, and perhaps most famously, the resting place of the once and future king. It was here, in the year 1191, that the monks of Glastonbury made an announcement that sent ripples through Christendom. They had found the grave of King Arthur himself. But was this a miraculous archaeological discovery, or a brilliantly staged piece of political theater designed to save their monastery from ruin? To understand the context of this incredible find, we must look at the state of the abbey in the late 12th century. A devastating fire had swept through the monastic buildings in 1184, leaving the complex in ashes and the community destitute. Rebuilding a structure of such scale required immense wealth, and the monks were desperate for a new source of income and prestige to attract pilgrims and their donations. At the same time, King Henry II was on the throne, a monarch deeply engaged in a bitter struggle for authority with the church and his own barons. The legend of King Arthur was more than just a popular story. It was a potent political symbol, the myth of a powerful, just British king who would one day return in the nation's hour of greatest need was a double-edged sword. For a reigning monarch like Henry, it could be a threat, a focal point for rebellion and dissent, as subjects might await Arthur's return to overthrow him. Alternatively, if he could somehow co-opt the legend and align his own reign with Arthur's, it could massively strengthen his legitimacy and authority. According to the account put forth by the monks, King Henry himself had heard an old Welsh bard's tale that Arthur was buried at Glastonbury, and he passed this information on to the abbot. The monks, while digging in their cemetery to relocate the bodies of their brethren to a new site after the fire, are said to have made the discovery. At a depth of some 16 feet, their shovels struck not earth but a massive hollowed-out oak log. Inside, they found the enormous skeletal remains of a man and a smaller set of a woman. But the most compelling evidence lay with them, a lead cross placed atop the burial, inscribed with the Latin words, Hic iasit sepultus inclitus rex Arthurius in insula Avalonia. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. The discovery was a public relations masterpiece. The monks ensured the news spread far and wide, and they displayed the massive bones and the cross as proof. The message was unequivocal. The legendary King Arthur was not sleeping in some magical realm waiting to return. He was dead, his bones right here for all to see. This served Henry II's purposes perfectly, effectively neutering the Arthurian legend as a rallying cry for his opponents. For the abbey, the benefits were immediate and enormous. Glastonbury was instantly transformed into a major pilgrimage site, second only to Canterbury. The flow of wealth from visitors who came to venerate the tomb of the great king provided the funds needed to rebuild the abbey into an even grander structure, securing its future for centuries. But the timing and the convenience of the discovery have led many historians to cry foul. The case for fabrication is strong. The lead cross itself is a major point of contention. Descriptions of its style and lettering suggest it was not ancient British or early medieval, but rather a perfect example of a 12th century artifact. It seems to have been crafted specifically to be found. Furthermore, the entire excavation was conducted by the monks themselves, with no independent witnesses. The details of the story also align a little too neatly with the Arthurian romances that were circulating at the time, particularly those by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who had popularized the connection between Glastonbury and Avalon a few decades earlier. It was as if the monks were using the most popular storybook of the age as their blueprint. The most plausible explanation is that this was an elaborate and highly successful hoax, orchestrated by the monks with at least the tacit approval, if not the active encouragement of the crown. They likely unearthed a much older, important grave, perhaps that of a forgotten Dark Age chieftain, and sanctified it with a newly made cross and a story the world was eager to believe. The real genius of the Glastonbury discovery lies not in its authenticity, but in its execution. It gave the people what they wanted, a tangible connection to their greatest hero while giving the powerful what they needed, a definitive end to a dangerous myth. The grave was destroyed during the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century, and the lead cross was lost in the 18th, leaving us with no physical evidence to examine. The truth is buried with the bones that were once displayed there, leaving us to wonder if the greatest trick the monks of Glastonbury ever pulled was convincing the world they had found a king. For centuries, while much of Europe was shrouded in what we often call the Dark Ages, the Iberian Peninsula was a beacon of intellectual light, a place where the flame of ancient knowledge was not just preserved but magnificently fanned. This was Al-Andalus, the realm of Moorish Spain, a society where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars worked alongside one another in a rare and profound collaboration. In great cities like Cordoba, Toledo, and Granada, they built vast libraries that became the envy of the world. The Caliphate of Cordoba's library was said to hold over 400,000 volumes at a time when the largest library in Christian Europe could perhaps boast a few hundred. These weren't just repositories of religious texts, they were the great hard drives of the medieval world, storing the recovered works of Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato, the advanced mathematical theories of Indian scholars, the astronomical charts of the Persians, and their own groundbreaking innovations in medicine, optics, and chemistry. This was a golden age where the decimal system and algebra were introduced to the West, where surgeons were performing complex operations unknown elsewhere, and where poets and philosophers debated the nature of the soul under orange trees in courtyards filled with the sound of fountains. It was a fragile, beautiful ecosystem of the mind, and its eventual collapse would lead to one of history's most devastating episodes of cultural and scientific loss. This brilliant epoch began to crumble with the relentless advance of the Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign by Christian kingdoms to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula. The fall of Cordoba in 1236 was a blow, but the real end came with the capture of Granada in 1492, the same year Columbus sailed for the New World. The victorious Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella now ruled a unified Spain, and their vision for it was one of rigid religious orthodoxy. The new regime could not tolerate a powerful, educated class that adhered to a different faith. What followed was a systematic, and at times violently zealous, effort to dismantle the intellectual infrastructure of Al-Andalus. The first and most obvious target was the physical heart of that knowledge, the libraries. While the popular image is of bonfires lighting up town squares, and there certainly were those, the reality of the destruction was likely more complex and in some ways even more tragic. Many texts were indeed burned outright by firebrand clerics who saw them as heretical or blasphemous. Others were simply torn apart, their parchment reused for bookbindings or as scrap paper. But a significant number, perhaps the majority, were simply neglected and left to rot. Without the scholarly class that valued and maintained them, these intricate books of paper and vellum succumbed to damp, to insects, and to the slow, indifferent decay of time in abandoned monastery cellars or sealed-up rooms. The knowledge they contained didn't vanish in a dramatic flash. It simply faded away, page by page, word by word, forgotten. The question of how much was truly lost is a haunting one for historians. We know of the gaps because we have the citations. We find references in later European texts to groundbreaking works by Andalusian scholars that we can no longer read. The physician and philosopher Ibn Rushd, known to the West as Averroes, wrote extensive commentaries on Aristotle that fundamentally reshaped medieval European thought. But scholars believe hundreds of his other treatises on law, medicine, and theology are gone. The brilliant surgeon Al-Zarawi authored a 30-volume medical encyclopedia that was a standard text in Europe for 500 years, yet we likely have only a fraction of his total output. What of the astronomers at the Toledo observatories who tracked the heavens with uncanny accuracy? Their detailed star charts and models of planetary motion are almost certainly lost. The real tragedy is that we don't even know what we don't know. The catalogue of the Great Library of Cordoba is itself lost, meaning we can only guess at the thousands of unique titles, the sole copies of ancient Greek plays, the advanced engineering manuals, and the philosophical discourses that once resided there. This was not merely the loss of Arab knowledge, it was the loss of humanity's knowledge, a collective step backward at the very moment the Renaissance was beginning to dawn. Yet the story isn't one of complete obliteration. A thin but vital thread of this learning survived, and its path of escape is a fascinating sub-mystery in itself. In the 12th century, a full 300 years before the fall of Granada, a remarkable translation movement was already underway in the multicultural city of Toledo after its Christian reconquest. Under the patronage of enlightened archbishops, teams of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian scholars worked together in a formalized school of translators to render the vast Arabic language corpus into Latin. This effort, led by figures like Gerard of Cremona, was a desperate race against time that most didn't even know they were running. They managed to save and transmit the foundational works of Andalusian science and philosophy, which then flowed north into the budding universities of Paris, Oxford, and Bologna. In many ways, the European Renaissance was built on the texts saved by the Toledo translators, but this only underscores the magnitude of what was later lost in the purges. The translators saved the core canonical texts, the greatest hits of the age. What burned in the 1400s were the deep cuts, the specialized studies, the controversial arguments, and the raw data that would have allowed science to advance in leaps rather than cautious steps. We inherited the summary, but the full library of research notes was thrown away. The lost knowledge of Moorish Spain remains a ghost in the machine of Western progress, a tantalizing glimpse of a future that could have been, leaving us to wonder how much further we might be today had those shelves been left untouched. Yet even as the flames of intellectual purges cast long shadows across Spain, a far older and more enigmatic mystery stood silent and immutable on the windswept coast of Brittany in northwestern France. Here, near the village of Carnac, lies one of the most breathtaking and bewildering archaeological sites on Earth, a sprawling, monumental landscape of standing stones whose scale is almost impossible to comprehend until you stand among them. Over 3,000 massive megaliths, hewn from local granite, stretch across the countryside in long, parallel rows that run for miles. These are the Carnac alignments, erected by a prehistoric people over 5,000 years ago, long before the pyramids of Egypt were even a dream. Their original purpose is a profound prehistoric puzzle. Were they a colossal astronomical calculator, a sacred pathway for religious processions, or a boundary marker for the realms of the living and the dead? But our journey into the medieval world asks a different question. What did the people of the Middle Ages, living amidst these silent, towering sentinels, make of them? For them, these were not ancient relics to be excavated and studied, but an active and intimidating part of their daily landscape, a canvas upon which they projected their own fears, faith, and folklore. In an age without the concept of deep prehistory, the existence of such a titanic construction demanded an explanation that fit within a medieval worldview. The stones were too large, too deliberately placed to be a natural formation. They had to be the work of some powerful, supernatural agency, and so a legend was born, one that would endure for centuries. The most popular tale claimed the stones were a pagan army, forever frozen in their tracks. The story tells of Cornelius, a Christian pope fleeing Roman persecution, who was cornered on this very coast by a relentless army of pagan soldiers. With nowhere left to run, Cornelius turned and faced his pursuers, raising his hand to make the sign of the cross. At that moment, the hand of God intervened, turning every last soldier into stone where they stood, their ranks perfectly preserved for all eternity. This elegant myth served multiple purposes. It provided a satisfying, divine reason for the stones' existence. It explained their neat military alignment, and it conveniently Christianized a blatantly pagan site, linking it to a saint, Saint Cornelius, who became the patron saint of the village. The legend effectively neutralized the stones' pre-Christian power by absorbing them into a new, approved religious narrative. But the medieval relationship with the Carnac stones was not solely one of fear or Christianization. There is compelling evidence that the site continued to hold a potent, albeit transformed, significance throughout the Middle Ages. Many of the larger, isolated standing stones or menhirs were often repurposed as boundary markers for medieval parishes. Their immovable, ancient presence made them perfect, unchallengeable points of reference in the landscape, legally defining the limits of a community's land and authority. Furthermore, local folklore is rich with stories attributing healing properties to the stones. It was believed that young couples struggling to conceive could visit certain stones at night. Women would slide down one particular stone to promote fertility, while men would rub against another to increase their virility. Other stones were said to cure rheumatism or childhood illnesses if the afflicted person touched them at the right phase of the moon. This suggests a persistent, underlying folk belief in the inherent power of the megaliths, a whisper of their original sacred purpose that managed to survive centuries of official Christian doctrine. The most fascinating medieval reinterpretation, however, concerns the concept of alignment itself. While the original builders likely had celestial or seasonal events in mind, medieval people saw the rose through a different lens. To them, such straight, purposeful lines in the landscape were not natural. They were the work of giants or of a lost, magical race. The stones were sometimes called the Druid stones, a misattribution that reflects the medieval belief that the ancient Celtic priests were powerful sorcerers capable of such feats of engineering. This association wasn't entirely negative. It acknowledged a form of power, even if it was a pagan one. In a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural was thin, the Karnak alignments were a physical manifestation of the uncanny, a place where the rules of the ordinary world seemed to bend. They were a reminder that the land itself was old and held secrets older than the church, older than kings, and older than memory. The medieval inhabitants of Karnak didn't just live near a tourist attraction. They lived in the shadow of a profound mystery, weaving stories not to solve it, but to make the unknown feel just familiar enough to bear. Yet, even as the stones of Karnak stood as silent monuments to a forgotten past, the medieval mind was also consumed by a quest to master the very building blocks of the future itself. It was a pursuit that blended the lines between science, magic, and faith, a search for the ultimate key that would unlock the secrets of the material universe. This was the domain of the alchemist, and their single greatest obsession was the legendary philosopher's stone. Far more than a simple substance to create gold, the stone was imagined as the pinnacle of creation, a divine catalyst that could perfect anything it touched, heal the sick, grant eternal life, and yes, transmute base metals into pure, incorruptible gold. To understand why this idea was so compelling, we must step into the worldview of a medieval scholar. For them, the universe was not a collection of inert elements but a living, breathing hierarchy of matter, all striving for a state of perfection. Base metals like lead or iron were seen as immature, sickly, and imperfect versions of gold, which was considered the metal in its most perfect divine state. The philosopher's stone was conceived as a medicine for metals, a miraculous cure that could accelerate this natural process of maturation and healing, instantly perfecting the flawed. But its power didn't stop there. If it could perfect metal, why not the human body? Thus, the stone was also the elixir of life, a potion that could cure all disease, restore youth, and confer physical immortality. This twin quest, the magnum opus, or great work, was not seen as a greedy or frivolous endeavor. For many practitioners, it was the highest form of scientific and spiritual exploration, a way to understand God's creation by actively participating in its perfection. While the quest often lives in the realm of myth, it was pursued by very real and brilliant historical figures. One of the most famous was the 13th century friar and philosopher Roger Bacon. This English Franciscan, often called Dr. Mirabilis or Wonderful Teacher, was a fierce advocate for experimental science. He firmly believed the philosopher's stone was a tangible, discoverable reality, a substance he referred to as the blessed stone that could extend human life by centuries and create immeasurable wealth to fund a new era of learning and crusades. Centuries later, in the 1400s, a French scribe named Nicolas Flamel would become the most legendary figure associated with the stone. According to the stories that swirled after his death, Flamel and his wife Perenelle accidentally discovered an ancient alchemical text and, after decades of study, successfully performed the transmutation. The evidence pointed to their sudden and immense wealth, which they lavished on charitable works, building hospitals and churches throughout Paris. While historians largely attribute their fortune to Flamel's successful career as a bookseller and landlord, the legend of his miraculous discovery persists as the quintessential alchemical success story. Perhaps no one embodied the blend of science and mysticism more than the 16th century Swiss physician Paracelsus. A revolutionary thinker who helped found modern medicine, he rejected ancient dogma and insisted on direct observation. For Paracelsus, the quest for the stone was intimately tied to healing. He believed a substance he called azoth, the essential life force, could be harnessed to create a universal medicine, and he claimed to have held the elusive stone in his own hands, describing it as a translucent, waxy substance with a radiant glow. The methods these alchemists used were as symbolic as they were chemical. Their laboratories were filled with complex apparatus for distillation, fermentation, and purification, but their writings were deliberately obscured by a labyrinth of allegory and code to protect their secrets from the unworthy. They spoke of a process involving a primordial first matter, often symbolized by a dragon or a black toad, which had to be purified through a series of color-coded stages: the blackening nigrido, the whitening albedo, the yellowing citrinitas, and finally the reddening rubido, which resulted in the glorious red stone. These stages were not just chemical reactions, they represented the spiritual death and rebirth of the alchemists themselves. The entire process was a metaphor for the soul's journey from the darkness of ignorance to the enlightenment of divine knowledge. This is why the pursuit captured the finest minds of the age. It promised more than riches. It offered a complete theory of the universe, a way to reconcile the physical with the spiritual, and a tangible method for humanity to achieve its ultimate potential. The secret of the Philosopher's Stone was, in the end, the secret of creation itself, a puzzle that challenged the greatest intellects to look at the raw stuff of the world and see not what it was, but what it could become. But even as alchemists across Europe searched their crucibles for the secret of eternal life, a very different and more tangible kind of vanishing act was unfolding in the rugged Scottish lowlands. This mystery does not concern a single individual or a lone relic, but the complete and unexplained disappearance of an entire noble dynasty at the very peak of its power. Our story now turns to the enigmatic fate of the St. Clair family, the Lords of Rosslyn, whose sudden and silent exit from the stage of history would become the bedrock of some of Scotland's most enduring and speculative legends. The St. Clairs or Sinclairs were not minor aristocracy. They were a powerhouse family with blood ties to the Norwegian and Scottish royal houses, vast landholdings, and a formidable reputation as warriors and statesmen. By the early 1300s, Sir William St. Clair was a prominent figure, a trusted knight in the court of Robert the Bruce and a man who had fought bravely for Scottish independence. His son, another Sir William, inherited not only the title but also a legacy of influence and ambition. The family was at the apex of its political and social power, deeply embedded in the intricate web of Scottish nobility. And then, around the middle of the 14th century, the entire main branch of this illustrious family simply vanished from all contemporary records. There were no chronicles of a bloody battle, no legal documents disputing the succession, no reports of plague striking their castle. It was as if they were quietly and completely erased from the world. This abrupt silence is made even more puzzling by the family's deeply rumored connections to one of the most secretive and persecuted organizations of the medieval world, the Knights Templar. When the Templar Order was violently suppressed by King Philip IV of France in 1307, its members across Europe were arrested, tortured, and executed on charges of heresy. But in Scotland, where King Robert the Bruce was himself excommunicated and at war with England, the papal order for the Templars' arrest was largely ignored. Scotland became a potential safe haven for fleeing knights, and the St. Clairs, with their significant power and remote lands, are at the center of these enduring legends. It is said that the last of the Templars, carrying their legendary treasure and their sacred knowledge, fled to Scotland and found protection under the St. Clair banner. Some tales even suggest that Sir William St. Clair himself was a high-ranking member of the order, and that the family's sudden disappearance was a direct result of this dangerous association, that they were forced into hiding to protect themselves and the secrets they guarded. This is where the mystery deepens and becomes forever intertwined with one of Scotland's most famous and enigmatic structures, Rosslyn Chapel. Though the chapel we see today was built in the 15th century by a later William St. Clair, its construction is often seen as a cryptic homage to the family's past and the secrets they may have carried. The chapel is a stone puzzle, overflowing with intricate carvings that defy easy explanation. There are images of maize and aloe vera plant species native to the Americas, carved decades before Columbus set sail. There are countless green men, pagan symbols of rebirth, nestled alongside Christian apostles. And there are the famous apprentice pillar and the master's pillar, wrapped in their own complex mythology of murder and divine inspiration. For many, Rosslyn Chapel is not merely a place of worship, it is a library in stone, a coded message left by the saint. Clares, perhaps to preserve the knowledge they had inherited from the Templars. So what happened to the family? The most plausible historical explanation is a tragic, albeit mundane, one. The 14th century was a brutal era, and Scotland was no exception. The Black Death swept through Europe in waves, with one particularly devastating pandemic striking Scotland in 1350. A powerful family living in close quarters in their castle would have been incredibly vulnerable to such a contagion. It is entirely possible that the St. Clare line was wiped out in a matter of weeks by the plague, their death so swift and complete that it took time for the outside world to even realize they were gone, their estates eventually passing to a distant cadet branch of the family. This would explain the lack of dramatic documentation. A plague death was a private tragedy, not a public event worthy of a chronicler's note. Yet the allure of a more conspiratorial end persists. If the St. Clares were indeed the protectors of the fleeing Templars and their treasure, be it the gold from the Paris treasury, the Holy Grail, or the lost knowledge of the ancient world, then their disappearance might have been a strategic retreat. They may have chosen to fade into obscurity, changing their name and integrating into the local population to protect their charge from the long arm of the Church and the French crown. Their sudden absence from the record could be the ultimate act of guardianship, a sacrifice of their noble identity to ensure a secret too great to be lost. The later construction of Rosslyn Chapel by their descendants could then be seen as a monument to this hidden history, a silent stone confession waiting for a future generation to understand its meaning. The vanishing of the St. Clare family remains a gap in the historical record, a silence that has been filled with the echoes of treasure, heresy, and a promise made to a dying order of knights, forever binding their name to the whispered legends of a hidden Scotland. Sail with us now into the ferocious, wind-whipped expanse of the North Atlantic, where the Vikings forged an empire not just with axe and sword, but with an almost supernatural mastery of the sea. Their longships crossed thousands of miles of treacherous, open ocean, from the fjords of Norway to the shores of Newfoundland, navigating far beyond the sight of land. For centuries, historians have grappled with a single, perplexing question. How did they achieve such stunningly accurate voyages under overcast skies when neither the sun nor the stars were visible to guide them? The answer may lie not in a mythical power, but in a legendary crystal mentioned in the sagas, the Solarstein or Sunstone. The ancient Viking sagas, those epic tales of exploration and adventure, speak of a magical gemstone used to locate the sun on completely clouded days. One particularly compelling account from the Rolfsthottir saga describes King Olaf consulting with a wise man about the position of the sun. The man produced a mysterious sunstone, held it aloft, and looked through it, correctly discerning the sun's location in a heavily overcast sky, much to the king's astonishment. For a long time, this was dismissed as pure folklore, a charming piece of poetic fiction. But science has a way of catching up to legend, and in the last few decades, researchers have begun to take the sunstone myth very seriously indeed. The leading theory proposes that the Viking sunstone was not a gem of magic, but a crystal of science, a piece of calcite known as Iceland spar. Iceland spar is a form of calcium carbonate that possesses a remarkable optical property known as birefringence or double refraction. When a beam of light enters the crystal, it is split into two separate rays. This means that if you look through a clear piece of Iceland spar, you will see a double image. The key to its use as a navigational tool lies in how it interacts with polarized light. Sunlight becomes polarized as it passes through the Earth's atmosphere, forming a pattern that is invisible to the human eye but is consistent and symmetrical around the sun, even when it is obscured by cloud or fog. By holding the Iceland spar up to the sky and slowly rotating it, a skilled navigator could look for the point where the two images within the crystal become equal in intensity or darkness. This point of equilibrium would reveal the hidden ring of polarization, and thus the exact bearing of the sun, even if it was completely hidden from view below the horizon. It was a way of seeing the invisible, of pulling direction from an empty gray sky. The theory moved from the plausible to the highly probable with a series of groundbreaking experiments and a truly electrifying archaeological discovery. Researchers using replicas of Iceland spar sunstones have demonstrated that the method is not only feasible but also remarkably accurate, capable of pinpointing the sun's position within a few degrees, even in twilight conditions. Then, in 2002, a team of archaeologists excavating a British shipwreck from the 1592 Alderney Elizabethan wreck, a vessel from an era still steeped in medieval navigation traditions, made a stunning find. Amid the wreckage, they discovered a small, rectangular block of Iceland spar, its edges worn smooth from handling. Its location near the ship's navigation instruments strongly suggests it was a functional tool, not mere cargo. This was the first physical evidence that such crystals were indeed used in maritime navigation, providing a tangible link to the Viking sagas written centuries earlier. So, did the Vikings actually use these sunstones? While we may never find a sunstone in the grave of a Viking chieftain, such an organic tool is unlikely to survive centuries in the soil. The cumulative evidence is overwhelmingly persuasive. We know the Vikings had the means to acquire Iceland spar, as deposits are found in Scandinavia. We know they possessed the seafaring prowess that demands sophisticated navigation. The Alderney find proves the concept was practiced by later mariners. When you combine the saga's description with the robust scientific principle and this archaeological evidence, the legendary Solarstein transforms from myth into what was likely a standard piece of a Viking navigator's kit. It was their secret weapon against the fog, their technological edge that turned the featureless ocean into a charted path. It stands as a testament to their ingenuity, a brilliant marriage of intuitive observation and a deep, unwritten understanding of the natural world's hidden rhythms. Imagine for a moment being a historian of medieval Germany and discovering that someone had ripped the very heart out of your most crucial textbook. This is precisely the dilemma scholars face when it comes to the 10th century and the reign of Otto the Great, the formidable king who forged the Holy Roman Empire. The reason for this colossal gap in our understanding is the baffling disappearance of a single, monumental work, the lost chronicle of Archbishop Adalbert of Magdeburg. Adalbert was no ordinary churchman. He was the ultimate insider, a trusted diplomat, chaplain, and confidant to Emperor Otto himself. He was present in the room where it happened, privy to secret councils, military strategies, and the intricate personal dynamics of the most powerful court in Europe. He didn't just witness history, he helped shape it, and he decided to write it all down. This wasn't meant to be a simple diary or a dried list of events. Based on the writings of those few later historians who claim to have seen it, Adalbert's chronicle was a comprehensive, sweeping history of Otto's reign. It would have been our primary source, our window into the formative years of the German nation. Think of the details it must have contained. First-hand accounts of the epic Battle of Lechfeld in 955, where Otto finally turned back the tide of Hungarian invasions that had terrorized Europe for decades. We have vague outlines of this pivotal conflict, but Adalbert could have given us the ground-level view. The smell of the smoke, the sound of the charge, the tactics that secured the victory. It would have detailed Otto's contentious relationship with his own family, the betrayals and alliances that constantly threatened his throne. Most importantly, it would have provided the emperor's own justification for his greatest political maneuver, marching into Rome and being crowned emperor of the Romans by the Pope in 962, an act that formally resurrected the Roman Empire in the West and set the stage for 1,000 years of European history. Yet today, this invaluable document is simply gone. It vanished centuries ago, leaving behind only a ghost, a handful of references and tantalizing fragments quoted by other medieval writers who were fortunate enough to have held the original in their hands. The most important of these was a monk named Thietmar of Mersburg, who wrote his own chronicle in the early 11th century. Thietmar openly admits that he relied heavily on Adalbert's work, borrowing entire sections verbatim. His history is therefore our best, albeit filtered, glimpse into the lost chronicle. But it's like seeing a magnificent tapestry only through the holes in a later, coarser cloth woven over it. We get pieces of the pattern, but the full picture, the color, and the artistry are forever lost. The mystery of its disappearance is as profound as the loss itself. In an age when such a valuable book would have been meticulously copied and recopied by monks in scriptoria across the land, how could every single version have been lost? There are theories, of course. The most sinister suggests deliberate destruction. Adalbert's account might have contained truths that later powerful figures found inconvenient or even dangerous. Perhaps it detailed a shameful episode the Church wished to forget, or offered a version of events that contradicted the official narrative carefully constructed by Otto's successors. In the ruthless world of medieval politics, erasing a book was a far simpler way to control history than refuting its claims. A more mundane, yet equally tragic, possibility is the sheer chaos of time. Magdeburg, the archdiocese Adalbert founded and where his chronicle was likely stored, suffered repeatedly from fires, pagan Slav raids, and the general ravages of war over the subsequent centuries. A single library fire could have consumed the sole master copy before it had been widely disseminated. The parchment, fragile and precious, might have been scraped clean and reused for a more contemporary text in a practice known as palimpsesting. The original history literally wiped away to make room for a newer story. The loss of Adalbert's chronicle is more than just a missing book. It is a permanent tear in the fabric of our past. It forces us to reconstruct the foundation of the Holy Roman Empire from second-hand accounts, foreign perspectives, and dry official charters, forever wondering what crucial truths and human dramas we are missing. It is a silent void where a great man's voice should be, a reminder that sometimes history isn't just written by the victors, it's also vulnerable to being unwritten by the relentless passage of time. Now, if the vanishing of an entire noble family seems like the ultimate cold case, prepare for a mystery that unfolds not on land, but on the open sea, a puzzle so complete and so eerie that it has earned its place as the medieval predecessor to the legendary ghost ship, the Mary Celeste. Our setting shifts to the cold, grey waters of the North Sea in the year 1390. A merchant cog, a sturdy single-masted vessel common for coastal trade, is spotted adrift. Its sails are tattered but still partially set, catching the wind just enough to give it a slow, ghostly momentum. A boarding party from another ship cautiously climbs aboard, their calls meeting only with the creak of timber and the cry of gulls. What they discover inside is a scene that would chill the blood of even the most seasoned sailor and launch a mystery that would captivate a continent. The ship was found to be in perfectly seaworthy condition. Its cargo of wool from England and wine from France was still neatly stowed in the hold, completely untouched. There was no sign of a struggle, no splinters from a battle, no bloodstains on the deck. Below, in the crew's quarters, the scene was even more unsettling. A simple meal of dried fish and hardtack was laid out on the table, as if the crew had just stepped away for a moment. Personal belongings, a clay pipe, a wooden drinking mug, a well-worn cloak were still in their places. It was a snapshot of a moment in time, a floating tableau of daily life that had been abruptly and completely abandoned. The only thing missing was the crew itself. Every single soul on board, from the captain to the lowliest deckhand, had vanished without a trace. In an age without radio, without satellites, and with superstition woven into the very fabric of daily life, the discovery of this abandoned ship sent a wave of panic and speculation across medieval Europe. How does an entire crew simply disappear from a sound vessel in the middle of a well-traveled sea lane? The authorities and the public alike were left to grapple with the question, and the theories they proposed tell us as much about medieval fears as they do about the event itself. The first and most logical suspicion fell on piracy. The North Sea was notoriously dangerous, plagued by bands of opportunistic raiders known as victual brothers or light dealers, who were essentially freelance pirates preying on merchant shipping. The theory went that pirates had swarmed the deck, overwhelmed the crew without a fight, and taken them all captive to be sold into slavery in distant ports. This was a common and terrifyingly real fate for sailors of the era. Yet, this explanation had a glaring flaw: the untouched cargo. What kind of pirate goes through the immense trouble of capturing a ship and its crew only to leave behind its valuable goods? It made no economic sense and pointed away to a far stranger conclusion. With the practical explanation failing to satisfy, the medieval mind quickly turned to the supernatural. The most popular and enduring theory was that the crew had fallen victim to a sea monster of unimaginable size and terror, a kraken from the depths. The legends of such creatures were already ancient, and a sudden, silent attack from a massive tentacled beast could, in theory, explain the lack of a struggle. The monster could have plucked the men from the deck one by one, leaving the ship itself unharmed. An even more chilling supernatural explanation was the belief in a ghost ship, a Flying Dutchman of its day, cursed to sail the seas with a dead crew. Some whispered that the sailors had been taken by demons or spirits for their sins, or that they had accidentally sailed into a cursed patch of sea where the veil between worlds was thin. These were not idle fantasies. They were genuine attempts to explain an event that defied all rational understanding, reflecting a world where the unexplained was often the work of God or the devil. But perhaps the most plausible explanation lies in a terrifying and instantaneous natural phenomenon unique to the sea. The North Sea is a notoriously volatile body of water, capable of generating sudden, violent squalls known as microbursts or waterspouts. A waterspout is essentially a tornado over water, a column of swirling, cloud-filled wind that can descend with little warning. The sheer, deafening roar of such an event approaching could have triggered a primal panic in the crew. Believing the ship was about to be swamped and sunk, they might have made a collective, catastrophic decision to abandon ship in the single longboat. If the squall then abruptly changed course or dissipated without actually striking their vessel, it would have left the mother ship perfectly intact, drifting away while the helpless crew watched from a small boat that was then swamped by the following waves, leaving no survivors and no evidence of their fate. Another compelling natural theory involves a sudden release of toxic gases from the seafloor, such as a methane bubble, which could have asphyxiated the entire crew in moments before dissipating harmlessly into the air. The Mary Celeste of 1390 remains one of history's most perfect maritime riddles, a blank page in the logbook of the past that challenges our need for closure and reminds us that the sea has always kept its most dreadful secrets to itself. But if the physical treasure of the Cathars remains an enigma, their rumored spiritual treasure is even more compelling. This leads us to the most radical theory of all, that the four escapees from Montségur carried not gold but books. And not just any books, but a hidden library of early Christian texts deemed so heretical by the Church that their very existence had to be erased from history. The Cathars were dualists, and their beliefs shared striking similarities with much older Gnostic traditions. Gnostic Gospels, like those found centuries later at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, presented a vastly different Christianity, one that emphasized secret knowledge or gnosis as the path to salvation over faith and church sacraments. They often portrayed the material world as a flawed creation of a lesser, ignorant God, the demiurge, and the true, transcendent God as something entirely separate. What if the Cathars were the guardians of such texts? What if they possessed copies of the Gospel of Thomas with its cryptic sayings of Jesus, or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which elevates her to a central apostolic role? These were writings that directly challenged the authority and the very narrative the medieval Catholic Church had built its power upon. The preservation of such a library would have been, for the perfecti, a treasure far greater than all the gold in Christendom, a spiritual arsenal to protect their faith's core truths. The possibility that such a library existed and was saved from the fires of Montségur is a tantalizing one. Could these texts have been smuggled to safety and hidden away in one of the countless caves that perforate the Pyrenees, like the famous Lombro's cave or the grottos of the Sabbats Mountains? Perhaps they were entrusted to another sympathetic group. This is where the legend often intertwines with the story of the Knights Templar, who had a significant presence in the Languedoc and were rumored to be sympathetic to, or even protectors of, the Cathars. The theory suggests the Templars became the new guardians of this dangerous knowledge, hiding it within their preceptories until their own order was destroyed in the early 14th century. From there, the trail of this hypothetical library goes utterly cold, leaving us with a haunting question. Did these world-altering texts ever truly exist? And if they did, could they still be waiting in some forgotten cavern? A time capsule of forbidden Christian thought that would force us to rewrite the entire history of the faith's early centuries. The hidden library of the Cathars represents the ultimate prize for historians, not mere wealth, but the power to finally hear the silenced voices of the past. Now we turn from the tangible to the theological, from treasures that can be held to a curse that captured the very essence of medieval Christian anxiety. Across the tapestry of medieval Europe, from the great cathedrals to the humble tavern, a singular, haunting figure began to appear in art, literature, and sermon. He was known as the Wandering Jew, an immortal man condemned to walk the earth until the second coming, a living witness to the crucifixion and a perpetual reminder of the peril of denying Christ. His legend is a dark mirror reflecting not a single event, but the deep-seated fears and complex social tensions of an entire age. The core of the myth is both simple and terrifying. The most common version tells of a Jewish man, often named Ahasuerus or Cartaphilus, who was present in Jerusalem during the Passion of Christ. As Jesus struggled under the weight of the cross on the road to Calvary, he paused for a moment to rest against the wall of the man's workshop or house. The man, instead of offering compassion, scornfully told him to move on and not delay his death. For this act of profound unkindness and rejection, Jesus delivered a chilling curse. He did not sentence the man to death, but to life, an endless, restless life. "I stand and rest, but you will go until the last day," Christ proclaimed, condemning the man to wander the earth without solace or the release of death until the final judgment. In some variations, the man is a shoemaker who even strikes Jesus, adding a layer of violence to the rejection. This curse of perpetual existence made the Wandering Jew the ultimate outsider, an eternal exile forced to observe the passage of centuries, forever separated from the community of man and the grace of God. So why did this specific legend emerge with such force in the 13th century and then spread like wildfire across the continent? Its first clear written appearance is in the Flores Historiarum, a chronicle by the English monk Roger of Wendover in 1228. He recounts how an Armenian bishop visiting the Abbey of St. Albans claimed to have met the very man, a penitent sinner named Cartaphilus, who had been Pontius Pilate's doorkeeper and had struck Jesus, leading to his eternal wandering. The story was later popularized by another monk, Matthew Paris, and from there it took on a life of its own. The legend spread so rapidly because it perfectly served multiple purposes for the medieval church. On one level, it was a powerful piece of anti-Jewish propaganda. At a time when Christian Europe was increasingly defining itself in opposition to Judaism, The figure of the wandering Jew became a personification of the Jewish people as a whole, stereotyped as blind to the truth of Christ, perpetually punished for their alleged role in the crucifixion, and doomed to exist as rootless outsiders. The myth provided a theological justification for the persecution and marginalization of Jewish communities, which were facing increasing violence, expulsion, and accusations of blood libel. But the power of the legend went far deeper than simple bigotry. The wandering Jew also tapped into a profound and universal Christian anxiety about the nature of time, death, and salvation. Medieval life was dominated by the expectation of the Second Coming, an event that was always imminent but never arrived. The wandering Jew became the ultimate symbol of this anxious waiting. He was a living anachronism, a man from biblical times forced to endure in the present, a walking reminder that Christ's return was both promised and delayed. His endless life was not a blessing but the worst possible punishment, a state of perpetual penitence without the hope of redemption. He served as a stark warning to every Christian believer about the consequences of a lack of faith and compassion, a memento mori in reverse, a reminder not of death, but of the terrifying burden of an unending life without divine grace. The legend also found fertile ground because it offered a convenient explanation for strange travelers and outsiders in a world that was deeply suspicious of strangers. In an age before photography or fast communication, how could one account for a person who appeared in one place speaking ancient languages or telling stories of eras long past? The myth of the wandering Jew provided a ready-made framework. Any mysterious, aged traveler with unusual knowledge could be folded into the archetype. Sightings were reported for centuries across Europe. A man in Hamburg in 1547, another in Vienna in 1599, each claiming to be the cursed immortal. These accounts were less about actual encounters and more about a collective need to make sense of the unknown, to project a powerful religious narrative onto the confusing and often frightening reality of a diverse and changing world. The wandering Jew was the perfect vessel for these projections, a blank slate upon which medieval society could inscribe its deepest fears about faith, time, and the other. His endless footsteps echo not with a single man's punishment, but with the restless conscience of an entire civilization. Yet even as the legendary wandering Jew served as a spiritual cautionary tale, the medieval world also held technological secrets so potent they could alter the very balance of power on the battlefield. We arrive now at the final enigma in our countdown, a mystery born not in the realm of faith or folklore, but in the fiery forges of war. For centuries, one weapon stood as the ultimate trump card of the Byzantine Empire, a terrifying force that could decide the fate of naval battles and secure the walls of Constantinople against impossible odds. This was Greek fire, a liquid flame that could not be extinguished by water, a weapon so devastating its formula was considered a state secret of the highest order, a secret that, when the empire finally fell, was lost to history forever. Imagine the sheer terror of facing this weapon for the first time. You are an Arab sailor during the first Arab siege of Constantinople in 674. Your fleet, hundreds of ships strong, has the great city surrounded, its future hanging in the balance. As your ship closes in, a strange tube-like device mounted on the deck of a Byzantine dromon, a swift warship, is pivoted toward you. Suddenly, a jet of liquid fire shrieks across the water, not as a lobbed projectile but as a continuous, focused stream roaring like a dragon. It strikes the sea itself, and the water erupts into flames that race across the surface. It hits the wooden hull of your ship, and the fire clings, burning with an unnatural ferocity. Your crew desperately tries to douse it with water, but this only makes the flames spread faster and burn brighter. The more you try to fight it, the more it consumes you. Panic is absolute. This was the reality of Greek fire, a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, designed to break the will of an enemy through sheer, incomprehensible horror. The precise recipe for this legendary substance died with the Byzantine Empire, but historians and chemists have pieced together plausible theories based on contemporary descriptions. The most widely accepted formula involves three key components that would have been available to Byzantine chemists, known as chymists. The base was likely crude oil or naphtha, a naturally occurring liquid petroleum that seeps from the ground in certain regions. This provided the flammable fuel. To this, they probably added pine resin or pitch, which would make the mixture sticky, allowing it to adhere to ships, fortifications, and even the skin of soldiers, making it nearly impossible to remove. The third and most mysterious ingredient was the chemical secret that allowed it to burn on water and resist quenching. The best candidate is quicklime or calcium oxide. Quicklime has a fascinating property. It reacts violently with water, releasing a tremendous amount of heat. This reaction would not only reignite any fuel that tried to be extinguished with water, but could actually cause the mixture to explode upon contact. Other potential additives include saltpeter, which could have contributed an early form of oxidation, or even sulfur, adding to the toxicity and intensity of the fumes. The final mixture was a thick, sticky gel that could be pressurized and projected through a complex device known as a siphon. The deployment system was as ingenious as the chemical itself. This was not simply fire in a jar. The Byzantines engineered a sophisticated brass pump and bellows apparatus, the siphon, which was mounted on the prows of their ships and on the walls of Constantinople. Operators would pressurize the tank of Greek fire and then open a valve, projecting the stream through a nozzle, which was likely heated with a brazier to pre-ignite the mixture as it launched. Some accounts describe the nozzle as being shaped like a bronze lion or dragon, with the fire roaring from its mouth, adding a further layer of psychological terror to the already devastating attack. The operators of these devices, the siphonarioi, were the empire's most valued military technicians. Their knowledge was compartmentalized and passed down within a select guild, and they were sworn to secrecy on pain of death. The formula was so guarded that emperors reportedly refused to commit it to paper, ensuring it was only ever transmitted orally from one generation of artisans to the next. This extreme secrecy, while effective in the short term, ultimately became the weapon's undoing. The loss of Greek fire was not a single event, but a slow fade into obscurity, inextricably linked to the long decline of the Byzantine Empire itself. As the empire's borders shrank under relentless pressure from Crusaders, Seljuk Turks, and others, they lost access to the key resource regions that supplied their special ingredients. The knowledge, confined to so few, was always vulnerable. A single plague striking the guild of siphonarioi, a key artisan dying without a fully trained apprentice, or the destruction of the imperial arsenal during the sack of Constantinople by the Crusaders in 1204, any of these could have fractured the chain of custody for this delicate knowledge. By the time the Ottoman Turks finally breached the legendary Theodosian walls in 1453, the great weapon that had saved the city so many times before was silent. The secret had already been lost, vanishing into the same ashes and ruins that consumed the last vestige of the Roman Empire. The world lost more than a recipe that day. It lost a masterpiece of military chemistry, a terrifying testament to human ingenuity that proved some secrets are so powerful, they can only be kept for a time before they are inevitably and permanently reclaimed by the unknown. And so our journey through the shadows and secrets of 1,000 years draws to a close. What emerges from these 30 mysteries is not a portrait of a simple, dark age, but a revelation of a world brimming with unimaginable complexity, wonder, and a deep, abiding uncertainty. This was an era where the map was still half empty, filled not with blank spaces, but with possibilities where a green-skinned child could emerge from a wolf pit, a king could possess a library of forgotten genius, and a simple priest could unearth a secret that would rewrite history itself. These enigmas show us a medieval mind that was not content with easy answers, but one that constantly probed the boundaries of the known world, seeking meaning in the stars, in ancient ruins, and in the very nature of God and creation. These puzzles captivate us because they are more than just historical cold cases. They are fundamental human stories. They speak to our deepest fears and our most ardent hopes. The fate of the princes in the tower is a chilling drama of power and betrayal that feels as immediate as any political thriller today. The hopeful, desperate search for Prester John mirrors our own longing for a hidden ally, a secret weapon that will tip the scales in our favor. The lonely quest of the alchemist in his laboratory is the ultimate metaphor for our own struggle to transform the base elements of our lives into something golden and meaningful. These are timeless narratives, simply dressed in the armor and robes of a distant age. They also remind us with profound humility that history is not a closed book but a living, breathing conversation where many pages are still missing. For every fact we possess, there is a vacuum of lost knowledge, a library burned, a chronicle erased, a secret taken to the grave. This isn't a failure of scholarship, it is the very nature of the past. It is what makes history a detective story without a final ending, where each discovery leads to new questions. The Voynich Manuscript and the Copper Scroll taunt us not because they are impenetrable, but because they are just barely penetrable. They offer the tantalizing glimpse of a truth that remains forever out of reach, reminding us that the past will always guard its deepest secrets. This is why we keep looking, keep debating, and keep wondering. These mysteries invite us to become active participants, to weigh the evidence for ourselves and draw our own conclusions. They connect us directly to the people of the Middle Ages, not as distant figures in a tapestry, but as individuals who looked up at the same stars and asked the same fundamental questions about life, death, and what lies beyond. So we turn the question over to you. Which of these forgotten mysteries captured your imagination? Was it the tragic silence of the lost colony of Roanoke, the defiant mystery of the Cathar treasure, or the terrifying power of Greek fire? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and keep the spirit of wonder alive. The search for answers is a journey that never truly ends.